Wow, what a journey this has been. This episode feels special. Not just because we're wrapping up another incredible year, but because I want to take you on a little trip. Through everything I've learned, the incredible guests I've spoken to, and the growth this podcast has had since day one. And honestly, this is as much as a reflection on where it all started as it is about looking forward to where we're going to next. When I first sat down to record my first episode, I had no idea what I was doing, no idea what this would become or who would listen, or even how I'd manage to keep it going. And yet here we are, years later, countless conversations deep, and a community of listeners who have been nothing short of amazing. You've stuck with me through those nerves of those early interviews, the slightly chaotic hair and beard phase. I don't know why I didn't see it or why no one else told me, but I looked like I was auditioning for some sort of pirate movie. And all the technical hiccups that come along with figuring things out on the fly. Back then it was just me, a basic microphone, a crappy camera, and a vision I couldn't really fully articulate. I knew I wanted to help people. I wanted to share insights on nutrition, living a vegan lifestyle, and making sure people looked after themselves. That was the mission. But I didn't anticipate the connection. The guests who've generously shared their wisdom, the conversations that have flowed so naturally, and the friendships that have grown from this podcast are things I will cherish forever. And here's the crazy part, most of the incredible connections I've made have come from people I've never met in person. The power of online community truly blows my mind. It's a reminder of how small the world can feel when you find your people. When you find those who inspire you, challenge you, and push you to be better. Looking back at those first episodes, I cringe a little. I cringe a lot, actually, but in the best ways possible. There's a snapshot of where I was. Sure, I was nervous, and my interview style back then was, let's say, a little overstructured. But that's growth, right? Today the conversations flow naturally, and the podcasts feel more like sitting down with old friends more than, conducting interviews. And it's not just the conversations that have evolved. I have too. From those first recordings to travelling the world with this podcast in my backpack. I remember filming the first few sitting in the freezing cold in England. And then just packing it all in. From England to Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, the States, Canada, Australia, and now Bali. And this podcast here has been my constant companion. It's been with me through all those transitions, challenges, and new beginnings. And every step along the way has shaped what this space has become. Also, those countries brought so many difficulties to the podcast. You don't have those great Wi-Fi connections. You have time differences that don't work out, and a lot of the episodes had to be scrapped because, well, they weren't good enough to air. And that wasn't on the guest. That was on the quality of what I was doing, the quality of the Wi-Fi, the connections, because those conversations were great. So where is it going next? The honest answer is, I don't know. And I love that. When I started this, I couldn't have predicted the amazing people I'd meet or the unexpected topics we'd dive into. I had this idea that it was going to stay firmly in the realm of nutrition and plant-based living. And while that's still at the heart of it, I've realised there's so much more to explore. There are people out there doing extraordinary things, sharing life-changing insights and inspiring us all to live with more purpose. And I want to bring you more of their stories too. But don't worry. The essence of this podcast isn't going anywhere. Whether it's nutrition, lifestyle, personal growth, or just some good old-fashioned storytelling. But this space will always be about helping you live better, think deeper, and finding your own way in the world. So as we close out this year, I want to thank you. Whether you've been here from the very beginning, stumbled across the podcast recently, or just hit play for your first time today. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your messages. Thank you for your feedback. It's what's kept me going, and it's what keeps this community alive. And now for this special episode, I'm diving into the archives. I'm pulling out some of those episodes that weren't the best quality, but there's nuggets in there that we can use. I'm pulling out all the lessons I've learned, all the insights I've learned, and the reflections from these past years. Things I've learned from guests, the travels, and honestly, just figuring it out as I go. This episode is a celebration of growth, a look back on the journey so far, and a glimpse into what's to come. So grab your tea, settle in, and let's do this together, because as much as this podcast is mine, it's also yours. And I can't wait to see where it takes us next. Here's the growth, connection, and all the stories we've yet to tell. This is the Plant Fuel Podcast. I'm Callum Weir. Let's dive in. Peace and plants.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, it's really important now as well that we do move regularly because I mean, there's a lot of research which out there about sedentary lifestyles and how sitting for long periods of time can be really bad for your cardiovascular system, etc. So it's not just about moving to burn more calories, because I think there's a lot more science coming out now as well that says it's not. You know, if you want to lose weight, just move more, just do more exercise. That isn't going to work for you. You can't outrun a bad diet, for example. It really is so much more complex than that. But doing more exercise, going into the open, is great also for your mental health. It gives you much more of a positive attitude. You feel alive, you feel more energy, you can be more creative and focused in your work. And when you're in that kind of happier place, generally, you actually function differently on so many different levels as well, that you actually become more positive, you become more confident in yourself. And I think it's possibly from that standpoint, it's easier to actually consider changing your eating style as well. A lot of people do succumb to eating more comfort foods when they're craving that comfort, when they're feeling down, when they're feeling anxious, depressed, stressed. I mean, there's also physiological processes that happen inside us when we're stressed that lend us more prone to putting on weight anyway. So I think if you can get yourself out there and get moving more and just increase your energy, your positive energy, it can work wonders. I didn't really know that when I was younger. I didn't think about that. I was too caught up within my corporate job. You know, I was earning good money. I was having a great lifestyle. I mean, here's this guy in his 30s sent out to Amsterdam to set up a business, and I'm out there for 8 years, all expenses paid, you know, paid apartment, etc. Just imagine that. I mean, who wouldn't do that? That was the last thing I was thinking about then, was about kind of my health really in the 30s. I realize now I should have been thinking about it a lot more. But, you know, like I guess a lot of guys particularly, because I think it is a bit of a male thing sometimes to that we don't tend to face what we need to do. We tend to think it's going to be all right. You know, I'll worry about that when I'm older. And it didn't occur to me. It was only really when I got into my kind of mid-40s and onwards, I realized, hey, you know, you're going to have to do something about this now. You get to the point where there are certain risk factors, people your age being overweight. And I've always been very can-do in terms of changing what I do and being open to making changes. And I think that's really important as well, because it sometimes surprises me, this attitude that, oh, I don't like that, I can't eat that, it doesn't agree with me, etc. And I like my, you know, X with that food, and etc. For me, I think that's what holds us back sometimes, that if we're prepared to change and give our taste buds the chance of actually getting used to a different type of food, then it can often work wonders. And we think, how come I never realized this before, that, you know, eating let's say a fresh crispy salad can be so nurturing and so enjoyable. But it does take time to actually make those adjustments. I will not lie about that. It's not necessarily something you're going to change overnight. You've got to just allow yourself the time and just believe that, you know, ultimately this will actually feel superb. You won't want to change back from this. And I think that's what I realized eventually. And that's what I want to inspire other people to do as well. Just believe in yourself that you will come to love this. Make changes gradually. You don't have to do it all overnight. Just, start incorporating more vegetables in your diet day to day. Maybe swap out the meat for some lentils or beans, etc. And gradually, that's, I think, how to make the change. I just wanted to say as well, if I may, just something about the whole thing about taste and texture, because I think it's really important as well that we bring this into the equation. That and it certainly was the case for me as well. That the modern food industry really we are captives of the food industry because they know exactly what tastes and textures get us hooked. And it's the salt, it's the sweetness, it's the fat, and reaching that point that, I mean, they call it the bliss point, knowing exactly what it is that's going to make us crave that particular food. And of course, it's so difficult once we've got used to that, because nothing, even natural food, the types of food we've just been talking about and extolling, those foods actually initially don't taste as exciting and tasty as the foods that the food industry create for us, because it's an absolute science how they've lured us to like that food, and therefore getting over that hurdle and getting over the need for those tastes and the cravings for those tastes and textures is part of the battle. If we can believe that it is possible, I suppose I sometimes liken it to smoking and giving up smoking. I mean, I did smoke earlier in my life, so that was another thing I did that was wrong. In retrospect, for me at least. And I used to think, how am I ever going to enjoy going out to the pub and having a beer anymore without having a cigarette to smoke? And we can't imagine that situation where it will be pleasurable anymore. Of course, it does become pleasurable, and you get rid of that feeling. And so it is with these let's say false or industrially produced foods, that we do actually get over that craving if we allow ourselves the chance and the time to adapt to the new, more natural, wholesome tastes. And I think that it's important that people realize that just allow yourself a bit of time to get over that hurdle. Once you've done it and you're at the other side, then it really does become much easier to actually start to eat more healthfully as well.
Now that was where it all started. That was the very first episode of this podcast. It was the incredible Graham Henry, and honestly, it's a conversation that still sticks with me to this day. When I think back to recording the episode, I remember being very nervous. It was my first time behind the mic, and I didn't really know what I was doing. Graham did make it feel easy. He brought this openness and energy that really set the tone that I hoped this podcast would become. Graham's story is one that many of us can relate to. At one point in his life, he found himself overweight, caused by unhealthy lifestyle, and heading down a path that wasn't sustainable. His health was starting to slip. And something had to change. In our conversation, he took us through this journey of recognizing that his priorities were out of balance. He talked about how easy it is to get wrapped up in the grind of daily life, work, obligations, and everything else that pulls at our attention until we forget about the one person who matters the most, ourselves. This is the big takeaway for me. How often do we forget to put ourselves first? Listen to what our bodies and minds are telling us. Graham's story was such a powerful reminder that we can't pour from an empty cup. We have to be present, check in with ourselves, and make those changes before it's too late. For Graham, that meant transitioning to a whole foods plant-based diet. A change transformed not only his health, but his outlook on life. What's even more inspiring is that his wife, Annette, joined him on this journey. And fun fact, Annette was also a guest on the podcast later on, where we dove deep into her experience living with endometriosis. Together, they became a team, supporting each other through the life-changing shift. This was more than just a story about weight loss or health. It was about regaining control, about breaking free from the systems that kept us hooked on unhealthy foods and habits. It's about how food can heal, inspire, and help us rewrite the narrative of our lives. Honestly, for my first episode, it was a killer conversation. And you know what even made it better? I'd met Graham and Annette just a few weeks before we recorded in Berlin. Spending time with them, seeing their energy and how they supported each other, it made the whole process so much smoother. Looking back, that episode taught me one of the most important lessons I've ever learned: the importance of being present and taking stock of where you are before life takes you down a road that you don't want to be on. It's not always easy, but it's so necessary. From then, let's fast forward to another early episode, one that also completely changed the way I think about health: my conversation with Dr. Anthony Rafferty. This one was about gut. This one was about the gut microbiome, and let me tell you, it opened up a whole new world for me. Before this episode, I knew the gut was important, but I didn't realize how crucial it was to almost every aspect of our health. Dr. Rafferty broke it all down in a way that was so clear and concise, it felt like a light bulb went off in my head. We talked about the little gut bugs living inside of us, how they work, and why they're so vital to our overall well-being. It was fascinating, and it kind of sent me down a rabbit hole that I'm still exploring to this day. After that conversation, I became obsessed with learning everything I could about the microbiome. I started reading studies, attending talks, and even giving my own presentation on the topic. In fact, some of the knowledge I picked up from Dr. Rafferty's episode is still part of the talks I give today. In fact, a few weeks back. And that's the beauty of conversations like this. They plant a seed, and that seed grows into something much bigger than you ever expected. I want to share with you a moment from the episode that really blew my mind. This clip was a turning point for me. It's what got me hooked on the microbiome and its potential to change lives. Let's check it out.
So essentially, the microbiome is the collection of microbes and the genetic material that they they contain. And so basically, if you look throughout our body, there's all different ecological niches on our body, and different groups or kind of communities of microbes live in each different little space. But the most densely populated of the kind of microbial communities is in the colon, the large intestine, and that consists of about nearly 40 trillion different type of microbes. So I think what was really interesting when you brought up that book earlier, this 10% human, I think that's based on the theory that essentially, if you looked at all the genetic information that's contained within our microbes and compared it to what is actually human, we're only about 10% human, because the other 90% of the genetic information is actually microbial, which is like completely fascinating to me, to think that we're more microbe than human essentially. But it's a fascinating kind of community, because it basically, it can fluctuate, it can kind of vary depending on what we choose to feed it essentially. So food is the primary kind of determinant of the microbial structure, and there's like hundreds and thousands of different types of species or strains of bugs that are kind of living there. And they all kind of break down different things, and they help to release kind of nutrients from the food that we eat. And they also produce products that basically keep the gut lining really healthy and well. And these things can whiz off around the rest of the body and basically impact our health in other really fascinating ways. I think fiber is absolutely fascinating, because I think, as many of the people tuning into your podcast and everything will be aware of, there's this kind of obsession with protein deficiency. People are obsessed with it, but what we should actually be really concerned about is fiber deficiency, because most of the population do not get enough fiber. And fiber is the primary food source for our gut bugs, essentially. So I think fiber can roughly be broken up into two categories. There's kind of insoluble fibers, which are kind of like whole grains and whole wheat and some vegetables. They're for kind of cleansing the colon, get things moving, help with kind of the flow through the digestive system. They kind of absorb or draw fluid in to the gut as well, to kind of help with that feeling of kind of satiety, that we're nice and full after we've eaten. And then you have soluble kind of fibers, which generally are in most kind of fruits, veg, nuts, seeds, things like that, legumes and beans. And they tend to be indigestible. So they pass through the small intestine and they move into the large intestine. That's where the gut bugs have their party time. Because these kind of indigestible fibers, which we can't break down ourselves, we rely on the gut microbiome to be able to digest these things for us and release the nutrients, you know? So we wouldn't be able to kind of release these things from the food without them. But essentially, within plants, you have these kind of soluble fibers. You have your insoluble fibers also. And then you have things such as like polyphenols and resistant starches. And they tend to kind of make up this group called prebiotics, which basically feed the gut microbiota. So the microbiota themselves, they're termed probiotics. So, you know, when you go into the store and you see a packet on the counter that's for sale, probiotics, which has become a complete kind of nutrition supplement that everybody's interested in taking these days. It's very well marketed. But probiotics are actually just little capsules of different types of bugs, essentially. So what you're consuming are just little types of bugs that, in the hopes that they'll kind of move through the digestive system and exert a positive impact on the gut and release their helpful little metabolites as they move through. So essentially, these prebiotics feed the probiotics, which are the bugs. And then what the bugs do is they basically produce a postbiotic, which are short chain amino acids, such as butyrate is probably the most kind of important one amongst others. And that essentially helps to kind of maintain a really good gut lining. And it can fly off around the rest of the body and have really beneficial impacts. And as well as that, they help to break down, or the bugs themselves, they break down other things that are coming into the body from our foods, and they essentially they kind of break it down into constituent products that can then head off to the body, other body sites that can be used as building blocks for other really key important things. Like if we consume tryptophan-rich products, that's a building block for serotonin. That's a happy hormone. Now, the gut microbes themselves can actually produce serotonin, which acts locally and helps with gut motility and all of these things. But precursors such as tryptophan, which are kind of broken down, can head off, it can cross the gut-brain or the blood-brain barrier and can help to produce serotonin locally in the brain as well. So it's really important that we have a good, diverse microbiome community structure by feeding them the right things so that they can then produce these kind of metabolites and break down foods so we can access the nutrients in them to maintain good body function.
And that was Dr. Anthony Rafferty, shedding light on the fascinating world of gut health. Honestly, conversations like that are why this podcast is so special to me. Taking a deep dive into a topic, learning something that completely shifts my perspective, and hopefully passing that same curiosity onto you. Now, let's move on to a conversation I never thought I'd be having, with someone who brought an entirely new perspective to the table, Megan Kelly. This was a subject that, if I'm honest, I hadn't really given much thought about before we spoke, and I think most people don't. We all think about food, right? How it was made, where does it come from, whether it's plant-based, organic, or locally grown. But what we don't always stop to think about is how it's grown. What it's grown from. Sure, we picture fruits and vegetables springing up naturally from the soil, which they do. But what's actually in that soil? What's feeding it? What's shaping the quality of our plants that we ultimately consume? This conversation opened my eyes to something I'd overlooked, the complexity of our food system, and how something as seemingly pure as a carrot or a head of lettuce might not align with the ideas we hold about being 100% vegan. Megan walked me through how soil itself could be made up of all sorts of things, sometimes including animal byproducts. And the truth is, unless you grow every single thing you eat yourself and are controlling every aspect of its production, it's nearly impossible to ensure that it perfectly aligns with a strict vegan lifestyle. And that was a humbling realization. I'd always been so focused on doing everything right, on making sure that I was sticking to my values and doing the best I could to live in alignment with them. But this conversation made me realize that perfection simply isn't possible. Not in this world. Not with a system that we have in place at the moment. And that's okay. What really struck me was Megan's perspective on letting go of the idea of perfection and instead focusing on progress. It's not about being a perfect vegan, the perfect advocate, or even the perfect anything. It's about doing what you can, learning as you go, and striving to make choices that reflect your values, even if they're not perfect. This episode taught me so much about the unseen complexities of the food system and reminded me of the importance of staying curious and open-minded. It's not about asking, what am I eating, but also, how was it grown? What's the story behind it? So here's a moment from that conversation with Meg and Kelly that really hit home for me. Let's take a listen.
When I looked into it more, I realized how oftentimes our fruits and veggies, whether they're grown on farms or whether people grow them themselves at home, oftentimes they're grown using very non-vegan ingredients. And so the fertilizers can be things like chicken manure, blood meal, bone meal, feather meal, fish emulsion. Those are very common fertilizers that are used on both non-organic farms and organic farms. And as somebody who's vegan, I had already decided I didn't really want any of those animal products in my life. So as a gardener, I certainly didn't want to bring things like that into my gardens. And I was really lucky because when I was kind of starting out on that journey, I met someone named Stefan Grolot, and he had actually been gardening veganically for several years, and he had studied organic agriculture, and he actually taught me how to garden. So I learned how to garden using totally plant-based fertilizers right away, which was really awesome. But it's a different experience because instead of, going to a garden center and picking up something like blood meal, well, then you have to kind of figure out what are the plant-based alternatives and what can we use instead. And so that led us back, this was 15 years ago, back in 2008, to start the Veganic Agriculture Network, which is to promote plant-based farming and gardening and the techniques to do that. And then more recently, about 3 years ago, we started teaching a gardening course called Learn Veganic. And really that's to kind of bring people through kind of a similar experience I had, which was just having someone, lead me step by step through how I could do things in a veganic way. So it's an area that not many people know about, so that's kind of why we put our concentration there, just to kind of get this info out to the world and to make it so that other people could garden in a way that's either aligned with their values or more environmentally friendly, because most info we find out there, really tells you how to garden with animal products, so it can be a lot harder to track down that info about how to do it in a plant-based way.
Absolutely, because I always assumed like you go into the grocery store and you see like the manure and the soil, the topsoil that you can buy for like growing your own like fruits and vegetables, but I never realized that just had like animal ingredients in a lot of the time. I obviously, me being ignorant, was just kind of like, but I think that's most people as well, is they just assume it is just soil. You don't assume there's other ingredients in there. So what kind of ingredients do you normally see, or what's to look out for when you are picking up like a soil or a fertilizer? What do we need to look out for? Is it on the packaging? Does it even say on the packaging?
It changes from country to country. So some things will be way more obvious. Like if you go into a garden center, some things will literally just say bone meal or blood meal, and that's exactly what's in the box. Other things, it'll say, topsoil or soil or fertilizer. And in those cases, it can be really hard to tell. Sometimes it's chemical fertilizers, sometimes it's animal-based, sometimes it might be plant-based. And the wording can be a bit confusing. So, for example, if something says fertilizer, it could really be any type of fertilizer. And it could really come from pretty much any origin. If something says compost, We typically think of that as meaning composted veggie scraps, but that could also be composted sheep manure, or it could be composted shrimp residues from the fishing industry. So, I've gone to buy soil from people before, and I've asked what's in it, and they say, oh, it's a great soil, it's got compost. And I'll say, well, what type of compost? And then they'll say, well, it's crab and fish compost. So even a word like compost that we might associate with being vegetable in origin, it isn't necessarily. So that's why I personally prefer, as much as possible, to make a lot of my fertilizers myself. So for example, when we make our own compost at home, well, then we can make entirely plant-based compost. We just don't put in any animal ingredients. And there's some other wonderful plants we can grow, like nettles, for example. Nettles is a plant that's really nutrient rich, so you can grow it and then feed it back to your other plants. But when we're looking at kind of commercial sources, sometimes we just need to phone the company. And then in some areas, you'll find products that are labeled as being vegan or labeled as being all plant-based, where some of them will list all of their ingredients. So, for example, some common ingredients that would be plant-based on the commercial side of things would be like alfalfa meal, soybean meal. In some cases, there could be rock dusts too that are mixed in. That's not quite as environmentally friendly, but it's still, at least it's not animal-based. And then there are some companies that have put out entire lines of vegan fertilizer products, more so in England and the US. So if someone's in England or the US, it's a lot easier to go online, order something and have it shipped to your door. Where I am in Canada, there's like one product. So, in Canada, I have to do a lot of kind of do-it-yourself, making my own vegan fertilizers, whereas some other countries, it's a bit easier.
That's so... Yeah, like when I didn't realize there was that much that went into it, because like I'm not even too sure what blood meal is, or I can only assume by the name what it is. So obviously, when you're having more, organic, very healthy plant-based soils, is there more advantages to this?
Yeah, for sure. And just to say, blood meal is exactly what you'd think it is. It's basically dehydrated blood that's left over from slaughterhouses. Bone meal is leftover bone that's been kind of ground up. So it's exactly what it sounds like. So, a lot of the fertilizers that are out there on the market, even oftentimes in the organic sector, are basically slaughterhouse byproducts and factory farm byproducts. In terms of the advantages, there's so many advantages. I would say pretty much any advantage that we can think of for a plant-based diet, those advantages really, go over to plant-based gardening and farming. So, for example, the sustainability side of things, it's really unsustainable to have animal agriculture. If we want to move away from animal agriculture, we need to do that both through the food that we're eating and how we grow our food. There's also a number of contaminants that can work their way into animal agriculture that can also work their way into the fertilizers. So, for example, in some cases, animals are fed heavy metals. In chicken manure, there have been problems, especially in the past, but it might still be happening in some areas today, of chickens being fed arsenic as an antiparasitic. Then there's arsenic in the chicken manure, and that's where you end up with things like arsenic in the organic rice supply. Because chicken manure with arsenic was used to grow organic rice, and even things like E. coli. When we look at the salmonella and E. coli outbreaks that sometimes happen, and it's blamed on spinach or it's blamed on lettuce. Well, it should really be blamed on the manure that ended up on that spinach or that ended up on that lettuce. So we can end up having a lot of contaminants entering our food supply, even the organic food supply that we might not suspect. And when we move over to growing with plant-based fertilizers, it doesn't necessarily resolve all of those issues magically, but it really reduces them and it makes it a lot easier to manage.
From that eye-opening conversation with Meg and Kelly, we're now moving to a fascinating chat with someone whose story challenges assumptions in the best way. Ashley Kitchens. Ashley is a registered dietitian with an origin story you wouldn't expect. She grew up on an Angus cattle farm. If you were to guess who might switch to a plant-based diet, you wouldn't think of someone with that background. And yet here she is, not only embracing a plant-based lifestyle, but also using her expertise to help others navigate their own journeys towards healthier eating. And what made my conversation with Ashley so powerful wasn't just her story, it was the way she broke things down in a way that really stuck. We covered a lot of ground, but one thing that stood out to me was how she explained cholesterol. Now, I talk about cholesterol quite a bit. I understand it and I share what I know, but sometimes explaining it in a way that resonates and sticks can be tricky. But Ashley absolutely nailed it. She took this topic that can feel overwhelming and made it simple, digestible, and empowering. But there's something else Ashley and I touched on, which feels so relevant today, and that's how social media can cloud our judgment when it comes to health. It's no secret that apps and platforms often viralize the most extreme diet trends and unrealistic body standards. You'll see someone with a six-pack promoting some fad diet, and it's easy to get sucked into thinking, that's the expert I should listen to. But Ashley's story is a reminder of why we need to value qualification, science, and practicality over appearance and trends. Social media creates this strange dynamic where the loudest, flashiest voices get the most attention, even when they might not know what they're talking about. Meanwhile, people like Ashley, who have the education and the credentials to back up that advice, often get drowned out. This is why this conversation felt important. It cuts through the noise and brings us back to what actually matters, making informed, balanced decisions about our health. So let's dive into this clip from Ashley, where she breaks down cholesterol in a way that's not only easy to understand, but serves as a reminder of why the right guidance is so important. Let's check it out.
Social media is just a highlight reel. You never know what is truly going on behind the scenes. You really don't. And social media has clouded diets in general and what we feel like we should and shouldn't do. It's confusing, and it makes sense why people are confused when they go on social media, because one person with a six-pack is telling you one thing, and then you got a doctor telling you another thing, and then this dietitian saying another thing, and it's confusing, and it's clouding what we feel like, or what we our intuition and our internal wisdom and what we feel like is best for us.
But for the people that don't know what is cholesterol, like from my understanding, it's like the cholesterol is like the waxy substance found in our blood, vital for building your cells and making minerals and hormones. But as we know, there's two different types of cholesterol as well.
Yep.
There's one good, there's one bad.
Yeah, and I feel like cholesterol does get a bad rap, but if there was a way that we could remove all the cholesterol from our body, we would die. So we do need cholesterol, like you said. I mean, we need it for our cell membranes. We need it to create certain hormones. We need it for vitamin D. Like, there's a lot of reasons we need cholesterol, and that is why our body makes it. Our body makes it because it is such a vital component of life, of living as a human being, as a mammal in general. And so cholesterol is very important. But like you're saying, there are two components that carry cholesterol. There's your HDL, which is what we often hear as your good cholesterol. And then there's LDL, which is what we often hear as bad cholesterol. And the LDL in particular, because again, cholesterol is very important, but LDL, when too much LDL starts to build up, it can start creating walls of plaque in our blood vessels. And so that's where it becomes problematic. That buildup over time, which I was listening to a podcast recently, it can start as early as being in the womb. If the person carrying you're in their womb, if they're eating a diet that is high in cholesterol. So you can start seeing signs of plaque buildup that early on, which is wild. That came from Neil Barnard, one of his podcasts. But that buildup can eventually lead to restricted blood flow. So that's where like a heart attack might come into play, or even just that chest pain or that shortness of breath. So that can be really problematic. And then there is the HDL, again, that good cholesterol that we talk about. And what HDL does is it helps return excess cholesterol in the body back to the liver. And the liver does a great job of helping get rid of that excess cholesterol through bile and then through feces. So yay, that's a good thing. And so that's why HDL, when your doctor might say, oh yeah, your HDL levels are good, that's a good thing, is because that HDL is helping basically your body get rid of cholesterol that you don't need. And then when the LDL is too high, that's when it gets a little scary, because that's when it can start building up in your blood vessels. And like I said, leading to things that we don't want, like heart attacks or just chest pain in general.
So if we're looking to let's say someone comes in, they have very high cholesterol, and they're looking to reduce it, but they don't know how, because also you can go to a doctor's and be like, just eat less, or just eat, less cheese, less meat, but they don't really give you tangible solutions. They could just kind of very much just cut that out a bit, or just stop eating that much. But what is a tangible solution that we can advise people to kind of, help reduce?
Yep. So I have a story for you, actually. So I went plant-based, like I said, about 12 years ago. A few years in, this is going to date me a little bit, but I was turning 30, and I found out that both my parents' cholesterols were in the 200s, and they were in their late 50s at the time. And of course, most of us want our parents to live a long, healthy life. And so I asked them, I was like, hey, we know your cholesterol numbers right now. My 30th birthday is coming up. Would you mind gifting me 3 months of going plant-based? Like, I don't want any other gifts, nothing. Like, that would be the biggest gift you could ever give me, is just try this quote diet for 3 months, and we'll test your cholesterol afterwards. We'll just see how it does. It'll be like a little experiment. And so to my surprise, because again, they're, Midwesterners, like, we had since moved from the farm, but that was still a big part of their diet, was the standard American diet. So they did it for 3 months. They went primarily, I would say, whole food, plant-based. And they do live in a small, more rural town. So it was a little bit challenging, but they made it work. And after 3 months, we tested their cholesterol. My mom's cholesterol dropped. It was about 55 points, which was huge. So it put her in the hundreds. It put her within normal limits. And my dad's dropped around 40 points. And that was just within 3 months of going from the standard American diet to a plant-based diet, which was huge. And not only that, they were sleeping better. They had more energy. They both lost a little bit of weight, which they weren't trying to do. And so it was this huge win. One of the biggest differences in their diet, going from the standard American diet to a plant-based one, which is the case for a lot of people, is that they were eating way more fiber. And I know you know this, that most people, especially here in the States, about 95% of people don't get the recommended daily amount of fiber, which is really, really unfortunate, because fiber has so many amazing benefits to our body. One being soluble fiber in particular can help lower your cholesterol. And so what that does is it helps bind cholesterol in the small intestine, again, kind of giving the liver, being like a sidekick to the liver and helping excrete more cholesterol. And so when you switch over from a sort of more meat and dairy centric type diet to a plant forward one, even if you don't go 100% plant-based, adding that extra fiber into your diet can have a huge impact on your cholesterol levels. And we haven't even talked about the fact that you're eating less saturated fat, you're eating less cholesterol in general, because you're not eating as much meat and dairy. And so there's a lot of benefits there, which we can absolutely get into, because I know how we both feel about eating meat and all the saturated fat and cholesterol that comes with it. So
next up, we have another incredible dietitian, Cassia. Her passion for changing the way we view health and healthy living is infectious. She's someone who's not just about the science of nutrition, but also about reshaping the conversation around what it really means to nourish ourselves. There were so many moments in our conversation that stuck with me, but one in particular feels so relevant right now. It's 2024, and yet somehow we're still seeing the persistence of this idea that eating 1,200 calories a day, or even less, is a sustainable way to achieve long-term health. It's a dietary trend that refuses to fade, and it's doing more harm than good. Cassia broke this down in such an honest, straightforward way. It's a reminder that these kind of diets might promise quick results, but they do come at a steep cost. Not just physically, but mentally too. The reality is, just starving yourself like this, whether it's for weight loss or chasing some unattainable ideal, it's just not sustainable. It's actively harmful. What really hit me was how Cassia emphasized the importance of looking beyond short-term goals. So often social media and diet culture pushes this narrative that less is better, that shrinking ourselves is the ultimate goal. But Cartia's perspective flips that script. She's all about abundance, not just the sense of food, but in a way we think about health, energy, and what it means to live a full life. This part of the episode feels like more of those truths we kind of need to keep hearing, especially when these harmful trends keep cycling through decades upon decades and years upon years. So let's listen to Cartia as she unpacks why these extreme calorie restrictions aren't the answer and how we can focus on long-term sustainable health instead.
Do you ever ask them when someone's like, oh, something's bad for you? And I go, oh, how? Like, I ask, like, genuine, like, how? Like, can you explain to me? Because I want to see, like, what they're able to regurgitate or tell me why it's bad. Because then when they can't answer it themselves, maybe they start questioning, like, wait, why is it bad?
Yeah, no, I've done that a few times. Somebody was like, oh, like grapes are the worst fruit because grapes are full of sugar, and I was like, so like grapes are gonna give me like whatever. I was like, how does that work? No, like I don't know. I was like, come on, guys, like we need to be using our brains slightly. Like if you don't know how it works and you haven't gone out to kind of educate yourself to find out if it's true, like, or you haven't asked somebody, like, and you're just taking this information from whatever source you've got it from, like you can't go around telling people this because if you don't know how it works, it might not be true.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
And I think like with that as well, I have seen many dietary trends and they get seriously more and more bizarre every time. And I think one of the more serious ones I have seen, and I still see it once, not so much anymore, but I do see once in a while still is people on these 1,200 calorie diets, which isn't enough to sustain a fully grown adult, let alone just about a toddler. I'm just kind of like, there's so many issues with that. So I don't know if you want to jump into those issues.
Yeah. I think, again, there's a lot to unpack. So that's kind of like, where do I even start? So I think even back then, I'm not going to like name call or like call out tracking apps, but like I know 10 years ago versus now, I think it's gotten even better where you know how you have these apps calculate how many calories you need and it'll spit you off the stuff if you just give them a few data points. And they used to give me a low amount. And this was before I was a dietitian. I was like, oh, okay. I guess they know. But then now I'll plug it in just to kind of see like how it's been, how the apps are, and they're better. So I will give them that. But I know you say, what is it, kilojoules, that you're measuring your energy, and I have like 1,200 calories.
Oh,
So, like,
I have calories. However, Australia do kilojoules, and I don't understand kilojoules. And seeing that, like, I think Australia's the only place that does kilojoules. I haven't bothered to learn.
But that amount that you mentioned is very low, and oftentimes we're not even able to meet like our nutritional needs on that, meaning even like our vitamins, minerals, we then have to be very strategic about it. Like you said, it's the recommendation for barely a toddler, just like a 2-year-old. So how is an adult that's probably like easily 8 times the size of that supposed to thrive? I think they're barely surviving off that amount, but now they're supposed to thrive off that amount. And when someone adapts and is looking for that diet, they're probably looking for weight loss is what I'm assuming. And that's why they're searching for like what to do, how many calories do I need to eat? They're more mindful of like, how is this weight going to come off? They're probably exercising too. So now we got to count that they're burning more because they're exercising, but they also need their body to survive. So there's such thing called basal metabolic rate, that how many calories do we need just to lay on a bed and do nothing but breathe. And sometimes for some people, that's the 1,200 calories. So as soon as you get up out of the bed in the morning and start moving around, you're now exerting more calories. And then you exercise on top of it. So you become this big deficit, and people think, oh, good. So that means I should go even lower because that means I'll burn more. But then your body adapts to now eating such low amounts that you're no longer going to be like burning off those calories because your body's kind of in a survival mode. It's like, okay, whatever they feed me now, I'm going to hold on to it because we might keep going lower and lower with calories. And then we get like symptoms of not getting enough calories, like brain fog, low energy. People sometimes have these like aesthetic goals of like, you know, I want to be lean, I want to be muscular. But if we don't have the fuel to gain muscle, it's not going to happen. So I think just there's that lack of education of like how many calories we actually need. How do we calculate them? Because I know a lot of people struggle with like obesity, and they're going to these extremes thinking 1200 is accurate because it's so popular. If you do a Google search and they'll show you like how many results of like 1200 calorie diet plans. Why are they still out there? Like, people are obviously still using it because someone is still putting it out there that this is the way to go. I know I talked a lot just now, but yeah, I struggle seeing that because it is such a low amount and it messes with like our hormones going so low. It messes with our metabolism. So many like things that happen in the body when we eat such a low amount of calories. We usually don't hit our nutritional needs.
Next up, we have Vanessa Sturman, someone who's all about helping people become their healthiest, happiest selves, but in a way that's attainable, achievable, and most importantly, fun. Vanessa has this incredible energy that makes the idea of living a healthy lifestyle feel doable, rather than daunting, and you know the best part? She's all about keeping your favourite foods on the menu. Vanessa's approach is a breath of fresh air in a world where so much of the health conversation feels so rigid and overwhelming. She doesn't preach perfection. Instead, she's focused on the process of making small, meaningful changes that build up over time. It's about consistency, those little steps you take each day that might not really feel like much in the moment, but compound into something powerful over time. And one of the key takeaways from our conversation was this idea of building health into your life. Rather than trying to overhaul everything at once, it's about calibrating, not starving, adding, not subtracting. Vanessa's philosophy reminds us that every small change counts, even when it feels like it doesn't. Whether it's swapping one ingredient, adding a daily walk, or simply having more mindful choices, these small intentional actions add up in the long run. What I love about Vanessa's message is that it's grounded in the idea of sustainability. It's not about chasing quick fixes or impossible standards. It's about creating a life you enjoy while becoming the healthiest version of yourself. So let's hear Vanessa as she shares her take on how to make health part of your life, one small consistent step at a time.
And I just saw one of your posts that, you know, something I tell people to do about adding in a couple of Brazil nuts every day as well. And it sounds so small, and it is really, really small, but it's consistency. And it's sometimes a bit of a boring message, especially when it comes to things like, you know, January or something. One of the analogies I give people is, okay, say you don't want to smell for the rest of the year. If you shower as hard as you possibly can for a week, like every soap, every shower gel, you're just going to smash that shower all day, every day for a whole week. Like, no one is going to have showered quite as hard as me for that week. You are still going to smell within a few days. Like, do you know what I mean? If you then stop showering, you are still going to smell. But you can get a shower for a couple of minutes every day and avoid smelling. Right? That's all it sort of takes. But you've got to be same with your teeth, right? You can't scrub your teeth. In fact, you'd actually damage your teeth probably in your gums if you went for cleaning your teeth crazily for an entire week. And it's the same with food, but it sounds boring because people are like, I want the detox, I want the retreat, I want this and this, and I want to just change in 7 days and I'm going to smash it. No, you've got to build this into your life. And it means that, say things do go out of balance a bit, I talk about recalibrating. Like, if you've overeaten yesterday, please don't starve yourself the next day. You know, just eat normally. Just eat, build in those really healthy foods. You know, have your usual oats and chia seeds and lots of fruit and nuts and everything for breakfast. Still do that. You don't have to punish yourself at all. But it's those small habits, like I'm going to build in the Brazil nuts and put those on my breakfast. I'm going to add some walnuts. I'm going to have fruit as part of my snacks, even if I am having something less healthy. It's just keeping those habits every day that gets the result. But it doesn't sound that sexy. You know, the kind of crazy detox, juice everything in sight sounds sexier.
Yeah, yeah, but like what you're saying there doesn't sound sexy at all in comparison to lose 4 stone in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That's the selling point, and that's, I think, like people want those quick fixes, and it's not a quick fix. There is no quick fix to many of these issues. It's just creating these, long-term sustainable things that you can nourish your body with. And I feel as well, like, where we both stand, which, even if you take the vegan part out of the equation, eating obviously a very plant-based diet and a more plant-forward diet for people that aren't willing to take that leap, as well as like a more plant-focused approach, should be what the majority of people should be looking towards these days, to at least achieve some health benefits for their life. No matter where they are in their life, like they could be like a 60-year-old now, or they can be like an 18-year-old. But like, obviously, either way, whatever age they are, there's always things you can do to improve.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to anyone listening, no matter what age you are, things can change. Like, it is unbelievable, actually, how, even though I don't like talking about quick results, but say a result that can be quite quick. Say for breakfast, you're normally having bread and butter, basically, and your coffee or whatever it is. If you just start having, instead of the butter, have some nut butter and add some fruit, you are going to be getting in so many more nutrients. You're going to stay fuller for longer. You're going to be reducing your saturated fat content. You're going to be adding healthier fats. That reduction in cravings that you might get from that is an immediate result. So when people say, I want some immediate results, I'm like, okay, well, add more of this stuff to your food. If you're cooking even a soup, I get a lot of people going, oh, but I had a healthy soup and I still wasn't full. I'm like, yeah, add some beans into it. Have a nice piece of avocado on toast with it or something like that. Maybe add some tofu to that. They are so much more full after that. That was a result they got within half an hour, basically, of making those changes. So it's like, actually, you can get results quickly. Will you see other changes that quickly? I don't know, but you are already more full. You are now less likely to eat all the chocolate late at night, which is absolutely incredible. That's enough of a quick result for people, really. But I think people don't realize that could happen, or they're so used to being how they are, or they think, I get some people, and it's really sad, they think there's something wrong with them, and they think, no, being a healthy weight isn't for me, or I just can't do it. And I look at their food, because it's got to be bespoke, and I look at their food and I'm like, yeah, actually, I'd be starving at 9 o'clock at night as well with that. Let's make these changes. Let's go to the start of the day. There is no, I think people get fed this, or there's something wrong with your willpower. It's like, no, believe me, you and me would be sitting on that sofa smashing the donuts at 9 o'clock together if we were eating like that. Don't worry, I'd be there with you. Let's go back to the start of the day. Let's actually go to the root cause. And I see so many things that are not going to the root cause. They're going, oh, I don't know, just snack on a bit of yogurt or something. I'm like, oh God, that's not helpful to someone who needs a proper meal, actually. Go back and change that. And some people have really realized, oh, actually, like, no, I was just hungry at that time. There wasn't something wrong with my willpower. And I think, being able to take it back to some of that simplicity for people. And yes, food can be emotional, but I've helped a lot of people realize that, yeah, they might have a bit of emotional eating, but not as much as they thought. They're like, actually, a lot of that was hunger, wasn't it? And I think that's a real problem. People have become so in their heads, instead of just going, actually, what else could I add to this plate? I could have added more beans to the avocado on toast. I could have added more veg to that. Some of it's so simple.
Next up, we have Lisa Patterson, someone who brought an incredible wealth of knowledge to a topic that's not talked about nearly enough: preconception health. Pregnancy can be a tough time, and parenting can be even tougher. But what we often forget is the stages before both of those, the preconception phase. And that can be one of the most challenging of all. In this episode, Lisa and I delve into everything preconception, both for men and women, We cover the journey to pregnancy, navigating the trimesters, and how to set yourself up for the healthiest chance of a smooth ride into parenthood. Lisa's insights were eye-opening and, for me, a real learning curve. I thought I had a good handle on the basics of these stages, but wow, there is so much more to uncover. And that's what makes this conversation so powerful. It's how it speaks to so many people out there who are trying to conceive but finding the journey harder than they expected. The truth is, preconception health is a game changer. From nutrition to lifestyle to mental well-being, Lisa shared actionable tips that could truly make a difference. The clip is one I know will resonate with so many of you, whether you're planning for a family now or just want to understand the process better. These insights are invaluable. So let's dive into this moment with Lisa as she breaks down the essential steps for improving chances of a healthy, happy journey into pregnancy.
It's probably one of my favorite topics when it comes to nutrition. Obviously, pregnancy and throughout the pregnancy, we need to pay special attention. But during preconception, that's where it really pays to make sure that your nutrition and your diet and lifestyle overall is, on point, basically. So the reason for that is, you can imagine, this is for both parties as well. So for males and for females, we actually have the follicle for females starts to, mature around 100 days before you actually can fall pregnant or will fall pregnant with that particular follicle. So we really need to make sure that we're putting that follicle, that person's overall health, in their best possible outcome, or best possible health for that outcome as well. So for a healthy baby, healthy chance of conception. And it's the same for males as well. So if we're actually talking about sperm health, we regenerate sperm every 60 to 90 days. So we really want that sperm to be so healthy, that DNA within that sperm to be in the best shape possible, because that, again, is going to really impact how we conceive and then how the outcome of that baby and that pregnancy goes forward as well. So it's such a pivotal time to be paying attention to your nutrition. And there's a lot we can do there that's going to, increase your chances of actually conceiving, because that isn't that easy anymore either, unfortunately. We're seeing declining fertility rates. I'm sure you've probably seen those headlines about even declining male fertility by about 50 to 60% over the last so many decades. And they're even saying now that, we might be looking at male fertility levels are actually considered inadequate to conceive by 2045. So we really need to be paying attention to how we can support both male and female health during the preconception stage. And nutrition is, I think, one of the biggest pillars there.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, I'm guessing it goes both ways, because it can't just be down to obviously the female for to look after her nutrition to do that. Obviously, guys, we have sperm. We know there's different things that affect it. Things like people's if you were to eat junk food constantly, or you were to be a smoker, these things are detrimental to obviously the sperm count itself. But so let's say for a female as such, and I'm planning that I want a child, I want to conceive, and I want to create the healthiest version of myself to kind of set up this conceivement. So what is the healthiest way? What are the things that I should be looking to kind of change in my life, whether that be nutrition to kind of cultivate that kind of very healthy time for pregnancy, or to at least try and conceive?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few different levels to this. And I think the first place that I would start would really be getting the basics right? So we can have these really complex kind of cases when it comes to fertility, but that's not usually always the case. So I like to start with the basics in clinic. And that would be, addressing any nutrient deficiencies. So we would do maybe some testing initially, and that's not always available to everyone, but in Australia under Medicare, you can get, your iron studies, your B12, your differentials as well. So your full blood count with differentials, all of those things done on a Medicare for a health check with your GP, but you can get it done obviously with clinical nutritionists like yourself and I as well. And then really identifying where there might be those nutrient gaps. So a really big one for females tends to be iron. And that actually can have adverse pregnancy outcomes if we're low in iron, but we can also have trouble conceiving as well. So really looking at where those nutrient gaps might be coming in. Omega-3, EPA, and DHA is another big one that we see. Addressing those first and foremost and allowing ourselves months to do that. So not just kind of going, and this won't always be the case, but I want to conceive next week. Ideally, we've given ourselves 3 months because we know that follicle is going to take 100 days on average to mature completely. And we want to make sure that we can put ourselves in the best position. So making sure that we have at least 3 months, if we can have longer, because, you would know this from clinical practice as well, that it takes quite a while to restore some of those nutrient deficiencies sometimes too. And we want to make sure that we've got plenty of time. We're not feeling rushed because stress is another big thing that can impact our ability to conceive and our fertility as well. So we'll be looking at that as sort of a first and foremost, but then also doing things like regular exercise, antioxidant rich diets, a really big one in nutrition. So we know that antioxidants are, for both female and male fertility, really, really key. They're going to support the mitochondria, support the, reducing free radical damage to the DNA as well, and to the sperm cells and the egg cells. All of those kind of things are really, really easy to do through diet. So that's quite a nice place to start too. Getting things like, enough sunshine. So vitamin D is important for fertility. They're just really nice places to start. But then we'd also be looking at the big ones, which is, reducing alcohol intake, not smoking, ideally eating, well, in our case, a whole food, plant-based diet where you can. That's kind of making sure that we're eating enough too. So we don't want to be underfueling during that preconception stage.
I think as well, like from my experience of people that I do know as well,
Yep.
that people that aren't looking after their diets or not thinking about it, that they are just getting pregnant very easily. Because I feel like there's a lot of people that seem to manage to just get pregnant, or it's very easy for them. Whereas I know also a lot of people where there's so much thought into it, they have to kind of, kind of plan things out, and obviously different ovulation stages and things like that. However, like, how is there such a vast difference as well between some people that are just like, stick it in, I've got a baby, compared to people
Absolutely.
that actually. So I feel like it could be stressful as well, trying to, obviously you want to be as stress-free as possible, but obviously if it's something that you really want, people stress everything to try and get what they want as well. And it's kind of like, how are we able to help these people that want to go through all these stages, can't get pregnant, but also they're stressing about all these different stages that you need to for the conceivement?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because it can be such an emotionally taxing time looking to conceive, particularly if you're on a sort of elongated fertility journey, right? Like, it's not happening when you would like it to. It's going well over that sort of 60 month period, and we're still not really getting answers, maybe. I know a lot of people kind of go through the medical system, and, that's fantastic, and there's so much support there really is. But maybe we need to be looking at a bit more of a holistic, like actually looking at the diet, because sometimes we might not necessarily be doing that during preconception care if we don't have the guidance of someone who's there to help with that. And then it is so taxing. It's just such a volatile time for your emotions as well. Never mind all the hormones that are, going up and down. And if we're taking, assisted reproductive technologies too. So that's a really good point to make. First of all, I think knowing that can be a possibility and really finding ways to support yourself during that time is really, really key. But the thing about it too is that it can be, there's so many things that impact fertility, like maybe we have issues like polycystic ovarian syndrome, or we have endometriosis as well. And a lot of the times they might go undiagnosed. So if we don't have that diagnosis and we don't know that that condition is actually present, and then we're still trying to conceive without taking it into account, that can really delay that process as well. There could be lots of other things there too, like, it could be the male fertility factor that we just haven't taken into consideration. I do know have quite a few clients and they've been tested, their ovarian reserve has been tested, their AMH has been tested, and everything's kind of coming back within range. They're not really sure why they haven't conceived yet, but their partner hasn't been tested. They haven't done a sperm test to see what's going on there as well. So there can be so many different factors, which I think is really why it's important that if if you're planning a pregnancy and you know that you've got the time there, if you can get both partners, if you are partnered during this process, but if you can get both partners to get tested prior to actually trying to conceive, that can really help to make that approach more targeted and be able to actually support fertility as best as possible. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can be, one of those cases where we're just not really sure why, but usually we'll find an answer.
With that, there's so many variables with it as well. There's not a kind of like one fits all, which obviously that's the kind of, that would be the dream. However, that's not the case.
Absolutely.
Which I do understand for people that are very much, this is that dream to have kids and stuff, and then they get then there's all this like information, there's things that aren't happening for them. It can be a very stressful time, and it's very much, I think as well, like, while you're going through that stressful time, taking precaution of exactly like your nutritional guidelines, finding out, the things that you need to do, and kind of research as much to kind of set yourself up for the healthiest possible conception. However, once you've done those and put those into place, and if those aren't working for you, and then that's kind of one of those ones where like, we may need to look into that a bit more, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. I think, we start with the basics always, and then we can always test. And it's always a great idea too, that if you can get that support from a healthcare professional during that time, if you need it, it's we have the ability to find more answers. So absolutely, like you said, so many variables. So, we want to get as much answers as we can if we need them.
Talking all things pregnancy with Lisa was incredible, but what happens when that phase is over? We find ourselves in the thick of parenting, and for many of you listening, that means raising children while sticking to a vegan or plant-based diet. And let's be honest, that can feel a bit overwhelming. The judgment, the questions, the unsolicited advice. It's a lot to navigate. That's why I was so excited to bring you Alex Caspero from Plant Based Juniors onto the podcast. Alex is a pediatrician and an expert in all things plant-based nutrition for kids. And she has a way of breaking things down that puts your mind at ease. This episode was a game changer, not just for parents already raising plant-based kids, but for anyone who's felt unsure or second-guessing their choices. I came into this episode with so many of your questions in mind. The ones you've been asking me about raising children on a plant-based diet, and Alex did not disappoint. She brought clarity, reassurance, and a ton of practical advice. We talked about everything from how to ensure your kids are meeting their nutritional needs to addressing common misconceptions about raising plant-based children. But one part of our conversation really stuck with me, and that's the balance between honouring your ethical values and prioritising your child's health. It's a question that so many parents wrestle with, and Alex handled it so beautifully, offering a perspective that's both compassionate and grounded in science. And then there's the biggie, what not to do in the first year of your child's life. That was a standout moment for me because it's not just about doing things right, but also about avoiding the pitfalls that could make the journey unnecessarily difficult. This clip is packed with wisdom, and I know it will resonate with anyone on this path, or even those curious about it. So let's hear from Alex Caspero as she tackles some of the most pressing questions about raising healthy plant-based kids.
One, I would say soy formula is a little different as it's the only nutrition. So the studies on soy formula are going to be different than the studies on, let's say, like soy foods. There are a few instances where soy formula would not be appropriate. If your child has congenital hypothyroidism, it wouldn't be appropriate. It's not usually appropriate for premature infants, just because of the composition. So I would say that in those situations, hands down, the most ethical choice, if you're using formula, is to do a cows-based formula, because homemade formulas are not appropriate. You can, obviously breastfeed is sort of like the quote unquote best option, but not all mothers are able to. There's a lot of barriers, especially here in America when it comes to going back to work and just access. So, I definitely understand that it's not sort of the option for every woman, even though it would be the preferred source of nutrition. And so, yeah, really, the choices on the market right now would be a soy-based protein or a cows-based. And yes, of course, if your child has a soy protein allergy, the ethical choice is going to be doing the cow's milk, because that's the only other option on the market. And I say that because I have had to have those really sad and difficult conversations with moms over the years. And, it's heartbreaking when you want to be able to breastfeed, or for whatever reason, it's not working. And then you have to go to formula, and then you find out, oh, your child has a soy protein intolerance, or has, they're not tolerating that formula. And the reality is, yes, the best option for your child is going to be that cow's milk. And it's not a shameful choice. You're making the best choice you can do for your child. And that's really what has to happen in that situation.
And it's only going to be for those early years as well.
That's right.
It's not just going to, once they've reached that, when they're onto kind of like weaning onto foods.
That's right. After 1 year. And so I do really want to reiterate too that any kind of milk besides formula, so a soy milk, cow's milk, pea milk, oat milk, all whatever we're having to milk, we can use it in cooking in infancy, but it should not be a drink or a beverage until after age 1. And again, that's sort of where some of those like scary headlines can come in, because I do think parents sometimes, are like, oh, my child's kind of weaning, they're on solid foods, I'll just give them soy milk. And soy milk is not the same thing as soy formula, and it can affect growth and development. Yeah, and especially when you have, all these quackadoodles online who scare you. And, I'm thinking we have one here, Bobby Parrish, and he's constantly battering on about how harmful formula is, and, looking at the ingredients. And it's just like, hey, parents, I promise you, formula is safe. It is not poison. I don't care what formula you get. There are different also price ranges. Formula can be really expensive. It can be a barrier for a lot of families, and it's the primary source of your child's nutrition. So please ignore anyone who's trying to make you feel bad about what formula you are choosing. Anyone who is demonizing the ingredients in formula, that should be a big red flag. They probably really don't understand pediatric nutrition. Yes. And I mean more, because it can seem scary. You flip over that label and you'll see things like oil and, corn syrup, and it can feel like, oh, I don't want to feed my child corn syrup. And it's like, you're not feeding your child corn syrup. Formula is safe. It is tested. It's a cheap source, unfortunately, of carbohydrates, but it's matched very well. I mean, the formula on the market these days is really good as far as being as close to human milk as we can. And so I just think that people who are trying to make mothers feel shamed or scared around their formula choices, I mean, I've got a lot of words for them, because it's just it's just awful.
Yeah, there is a lot going around, and I think that it is just due to, because anybody can just kind of go online now, say anything, and just people will follow them as long as they say it with like a load of conviction.
Yeah,
they're fine.
Well, and they're like, oh, don't feed. Well, and I think where I also want to just sort of quickly educate around is, then they'll share a recipe for a homemade formula. Please don't do that. Those are not safe. They are not, especially some of it's not okay. It's not safe. I do get very worried and scared, because again, I've worked with a lot of moms, and I know that a lot of decisions we make when it comes to our child are obviously in the best interest, but it can sort of have those oh, am I doing the right thing? Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Should I be doing this? And I think that people can really prey on those insecurities and, homemade formula, no. Soy milk, cow's milk, any kind of milk before age 1 is a drink, no. Whatever formula is on the market that's well tolerated by your child is a great option.
Now, this next segment is a bit of a bittersweet one. It's from an episode that unfortunately never aired. Back in the early days of the podcast, I had an amazing conversation with Luca Fent, known to many of you on Instagram as Marshall Fent. But between a dodgy Wi-Fi signal, a muffled early microphone setup, and tech that wasn't on my side, this episode ended up being unplayable. For a long time I felt bad about never being able to share this with you, because it was such a brilliant conversation, one of those chats that leaves you buzzing with inspiration and ideas. And recently though, I've dove into the archives to see if there's anything I could salvage from it. And while most of the hour and a half we recorded were beyond saving, I did manage to rescue one small but powerful clip. Luca is someone whose story is just incredible. He's faced immense challenges, including battling disease, but has used ice baths not only as a tool for healing, but also as a way to push himself to create the best version of himself. His passion for cold water therapy, his resilience, and his insights into both physical and mental benefits are something I've wanted to share with you for a long time. Kind of makes you want to jump into an ice bath. But while I wish I could have shared the entire episode, I'm so glad this piece survived. It's a glimpse into a journey of his dedication to taking control of his life in a way that's both inspiring and deeply practical. So, without further ado, here's Luca on the power of ice baths and how they've helped him transform his life.
So the nice things about the cold is that is another way for meditate. So for sure you have to have some knowledge of what you do when and how to breathe when you are in the cold. But it's something that if you focus, your body is already set for do it. So you have just to relax and try to don't fight the cold in the first place, but just embrace what the cold can teach you. And I learned to love the cold in the past 2 years, and from there is definitely part of my life, because I deal with the cold. So deal with the short-term stress, help you really a lot to deal with the emotional stress or other kind of stress that can get you during your day. So the cold is a really good teacher, and also is a great cardiovascular system too, cardiovascular training too. So it combines many positive effects in your body, because you also, when you are in the cold, you start to releasing a lot of hormones that make you also happy. So you will feel happy after the cold exposure, and that is a really amazing things that and that is probably why I'm keep doing that, because the feeling is really nice. So to have a really effective in term for the cold, like for have a result in reducing inflammation in your body, you have to stay at least from 10 to 15 minutes. So that require big training in the cold. And yeah, for sure, right now that I'm able to stay quite so long in the cold, that really helped me to deal with the inflammation that sometimes affects my body. So yeah, definitely is something that I decided to start with the cold exposure, just because I I heard about people that that had kind of a similar disease of me, and they was able to deal with it easier just because they was doing this cold treatment. So that is why I started in the first place. And yeah, I definitely feel better for the inflammation that my disease get, but also like as an athlete for the recovery. I used to do it at least. Right now that I'm in Mexico, that is a pretty complicated weather for the ice. I'm doing only once a week. But when I was in Italy, that was part of my daily routine. So it was like from 5 to 10 minutes every day in the morning. So that's really help to recovery faster. So you can do like a really smooth transition and start with like a bucket with ice and just put your hands, one hand at the time for 1 minute, and just to start to deal with the cold. And also a good thing is start to do cold showers. So after your warm shower, you just turn it cold and you stay for 30 seconds and you try to build up the time day by day until when like you are able to stay 2 minutes with a cold water. So you can start to take a cold shower from the beginning. And from the cold shower, yeah, you can start to try to sit in an ice bath. The thing is about the ice bath is that your body needs around 1 minute for adapt to the cold. So in that minute, you have to be really focused on your breath, and your mindset have to be really set on what you're doing. After that minute, you are able to stay a bit longer because you start to relax. Your breathing start to be slow. Your heartbeat also will slow down. And that is the moment where you can go out. When I do my ice bath session to my clients right now, that is the main things I am teaching. You don't have to go out when you're still on stress. You have to sit until you feel that you are comfortable, and then you go out. So normally after 1 minute, you start to feel comfortable. And for sure, 2 minutes is a good thing for start. If someone is not used to have an ice bath. And yeah, the ice bath teaches you to stay in the present moment, and that is a really good things right now. And it helps a lot with your mindset too, because sometimes we are all over the place with our mind, and we are not able to stay like in the present moment. And the cold force you to be in the present moment. Otherwise, you will feel cold and you will freeze a lot. So that is a good thing to learn from the cold.
We now move on to someone who's been a staple on this podcast, a voice of unwavering inspiration and motivation, Robert Cheek. Robert has joined me multiple times, and each conversation has been packed with so much wisdom and insight that it's always a challenge to pull out 1 or 2 moments. His newest episode, centered around his book, The Impactful Vegan, was no exception. It's a deep dive into creating change, living intentionally, and embracing the power of activism. But for this episode, I wanted to rewind and revisit our very first conversation together. It was a raw and powerful discussion about mindset, one that left a lasting impression on me. In that episode, Robert opened up about how stepping back from social media became a pivotal move in his life. It was a decision that not only helped him rediscover his focus, but allowed him to produce some of the most impactful work of his career. We talked about how social media can often hold us back from becoming our best selves, endless comparison, the constant noise, and how stepping away can shift your mindset in ways you didn't even realize you needed. For Robert, that shift wasn't just personal, it was foundational. It gave him clarity and drive to channel his energy into creating books that not only inspire, but truly educate. works that fuse his passion for activism and his dedication to athleticism. It's a message that feels just as relevant today as it did when we first spoke, especially in a world where it's so easy to get caught up in the scroll and lose sight of what really matters. Let's revisit that earlier conversation with Robert Cheek, where he shares his thoughts and mindset stepping back and how it all led him to create some of his most impactful work of his life.
For me, mindset has been the foundation of all of this stuff. In fact, in all of my books, that's a key component. There's always this element of mindfulness and mindset and accountability and self-improvement and all of these things that are inherent in my writing style, because I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be a champion vegan bodybuilder. I wouldn't be a New York Times bestselling author. I wouldn't be a speaker who's spoken on stage around the world in Asia, Australia, Europe, South America, North America, all these places as a speaker about health, wellness, nutrition, veganism, if it wasn't for these aspects of mindset. And you're right. The reason I said 100% at the start was actually to your comment about the gym. I mean, I go to the gym, and maybe it's the types of gyms we go to. I don't know. But absolutely, most people that I see spend as much time on their phone as they do exercising. And you know why I know that? Because I was one of those people. And I was as guilty as anyone that I'd ever seen. I would always have my phone on me during workouts. I could be in a shoulder press exercise, and like in the middle of the exercise, like literally in the middle of the exercise, I think of a funny thing to post on Twitter, and I'll stop the exercise and I'll make my tweet, and then I'll get back to, and then I'll check notifications constantly to the point that I could be sitting on a machine for 20 minutes, and someone said, "Excuse me, are you still using this?" And I was doing that for a long time, and it did stunt a lot of my progress as I recognized. And then I did something fairly. It shouldn't be radical, but it's radical in today's world. And that was that I deleted every single social media app from my phone, just completely. I didn't say goodbye on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, or, hey, announcing that I'm taking a break, or a farewell post, and, all the stuff that's really designed mostly, when we do that, it's mostly for ego and like for, pats on the back. Oh, I'm going to miss you, or, keep in touch in some other ways, or don't go away. I missed your post, whatever. Sometimes we're calling out for some sort of affirmation or some sort of feedback from that, because we're all, at the end of the day, we're all striving for significance and to feel appreciated and acknowledged and seen and heard. And that's really the foundation of all this stuff, including a lot of this fitness world. I want to be seen and heard and appreciated for my hard work. Look at my physique. Please comment on it. That's what I need. I need feedback, or else why even do it? So I let go of that stuff. It wasn't easy, but I let go of it. And Callum, I've got to tell you, during that time, my entire vision of the world around me changed, because I was the person that was so obsessive that even just driving my car, you get to a red light, get a red light, you're there for a minute or so. I'd just be looking at my phone constantly. I'm at a red light, and then drive the next red light, look again, the grocery store, waiting in line, look again, when somebody's talking to me, but I'm already kind of bored, I'm tuned out. Let me check something real quick, while they're still talking to me. I mean, this bizarre behavior. And what I discovered was I didn't have that distraction with me anymore. And so I would go out to lunch with friends, let's say, as an example. And my friends would all be on their phones, and I would just be sitting there, just present and just looking around me and just noticing things differently. I would go to the gym, and I wouldn't even have my phone on me. I mean, it's not even with me. There's no temptation. And my workouts were better. And I noticed everybody around me was kind of going through the motions. They weren't applying themselves. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was being objectively critical of myself, of this is what I was doing. That's why I wasn't making progress. I wasn't actually doing it. I was going through the motions, and I was more focused on entertaining myself through my phone. But for me, most importantly, was that I rediscovered a tremendous amount of time. The thing that we're all going to run out of, the thing that we're just gripping to and holding on to, that is just fleeting and is not going to be there. And I realized, man, I have hours and hours of extra time that I used to be obsessed with my portable technology that was controlling me. I wasn't controlling it. It absolutely controlled me. During that time, I was on and off of, where I deleted it completely. And some platforms I didn't use for even 13 months at a time, like Twitter. I wrote 3 books during that time. I was the most productive that I'd ever been. I got in the best shape of my life. I was touring around the world. I was enjoying things. I was hiking. I lived in Arizona at the time. I was hiking in the mountains with beautiful, sunny, warm weather, with cactus and wild horses and all rivers around me for hours a day, because I had the time. I could still dedicate time to writing and to working and all this stuff, but I wasn't distracted all the time. And I'm someone who gets distracted easily. I have a very difficult challenge staying focused, which is why, for me, it's another reason why even being able to write a book is such an accomplishment for me, because it's so hard. It's just so hard for me to stay focused. But one of the most important things that I ever did was to delete all those social media apps. And you know what happened when I came back? I still had the same number of followers. Not much had changed. I even posted on, including really social platforms like Facebook, where it's like your friends, your family, it's like, you know, people a bit closer to you than maybe Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. And so I would post, you know, what I miss. And the most common response, honestly, was not much or nothing. Some people, sure, they got married, maybe someone, their parent died. This stuff happens all the time. And maybe I just missed it. I missed that someone had a baby, someone, you know, maybe a childhood friend, an old classmate that I rarely keep in touch with. Maybe they got married or they had a kid. But I didn't really miss out on a lot. But what I gained was self-control, time, better relationships. I spent more time with my wife. I spent more time with our dogs. I spent more time with particular friends. I spent more time with family. I used to go back home where I'm from in Oregon and visit with my family just once or twice a year, but I'd still be playing on my phone because everyone knows me as like Robert, the internet guy. You know, I sell my books through my phone. And I stopped all that, and I was just present, you know, like just talking to my mom, where before I would get distracted or tune out or like, okay, well, I better go get back to work now. And it changed everything in my life to the point that I've been wanting to do it again. Now that this book is out and it's already made the New York Times bestseller list and became a #1 international bestseller and achieved these things because largely of a specific approach that I already took. I can't wait to go back there. You know, I can't wait to disconnect while also reconnecting with my present self. And so that's something that is important to me, and it's a long answer for your question about mindset, but that's what enabled me to actually tap into that creative mindset and discipline and create positive habits, was by, you know, removing this guy.
We move on to another powerhouse of thought and insight, Arjun, a vegan educator and author of Wisdom Through Psychology. This episode was packed with eye-opening discussions tackling some of the most common myths we hear around veganism, like crop deaths and how cultural and religious narratives have been shaped to reinforce certain biases in our lives. Arjun has a way of distilling complex ideas into digestible insights. And one of the standout moments for me was when he introduced the concept of what he called the matrix. It's a fascinating lens through which we view our societal systems that condition us to accept certain norms, often without questioning their origins or consequences. But there was one part of our conversation that stood out even more: religion. Arjun dived into how all major religions, at their core, promote compassion and benevolence. It's a perspective that challenges the common interpretations we've been handed. Like the idea of dominion over the animals, does that justify their exploitation or death? He also unpacked the split between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible, exploring whether that division speaks to an evolving understanding of compassion and morality. Was there a deeper purpose to that shift? And how might those teachings align with the lifestyle of non-violence today? This part of our chat felt deeply relevant, not just for vegans, but for anyone interested in exploring how spirituality and ethical living intersect. So let's dive into this clip with Arjun, where he brings a refreshing perspective to the conversation about religion, compassion, and what it truly means to live in alignment with our values.
The interpretations and practices that obviously evolve over time, but many religions, principles, and it's really about compassion and respect for life and stewardship for the earth. However, when you put it into the perspective of not eating animals, that's a no-go.
Yeah, I think the best and worst part about religion is the same thing, and that's that it can be interpreted the way you want it to be interpreted. And I've done actually like a long format video on different religions, arguing that reinterpreting it and arguing it in favor of veganism. So I've done it on Christianity, I've done it on Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I've even done it on Satanism. I've done it like a lot of different religions, which I probably could do even more on. But I think every religion at some point, like if you look at the core values, you can find the message of compassion, ethics, and doing what's right for your body to really like harmonize it with like what nature intended you to eat. And I mean, I think the most obvious one for me, just looking at it like as someone who wasn't grown Christian, just, like, why is there a New Testament? Like, why did we need to rewrite the word of God? Like, why wasn't the Old Testament good enough? If that was the word of God, who created the New Testament? From my understanding, it's like some king in like the 11th century decided to just rewrite the whole thing, or like, and like a bunch of his scholars to rewrite it in a way that fit their criteria. So I'm just kind of like, I think if you're going to be a Christian, like a real Christian, you would want to follow it from like the original testament that basically said, every seed-bearing plant is for us to consume, and it had nothing to do with consuming animals, because that's like the OG way of doing it. But I guess, people's interpretations change, and now the New Testament is more popularized. But even with the New Testament, I would argue, because I think temptations has always been a sin of Christianity, right? And doing things that are unethical, doing things that can, cause violence, thou shalt not kill. Like, you can interpret these things as saying that we are giving into temptations by consuming meat. Because even if God created, what was it? Something about like, he gave you dominion over all the plants and animals, right? That's probably the line in the New Testament that a lot of...
something along the lines of that.
Yeah, something along the lines of that meat eaters will say, well, it says in the Bible that God gave us dominion over plants and animals. Well, now we got to look at, right, like we got to interpret it like really, really closely. What does dominion mean? Does dominion mean cause the entire environment to suffer and do as you please, burn all the plants, burn all the animals? Is that what dominion means for you? Or does dominion mean that you're just responsible for everything, right? You're in charge of everything. That's what I would argue, that you actually, if you are the chosen one, right, that God gave you dominion, you would need to act like a god amongst the plants and animals, bring order to the kingdom of animals, bring order to the kingdom of plants, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, just bridge everything together so it's like in harmony, right? So you could even argue that dominion means that you need to take care of everything, versus some people saying, I have dominion over plants and animals, therefore I can consume them and kill them and destroy everything if I wanted to. Or you can argue it in the sense that during the times of survival, like when the Bible was written, they needed to kill animals, to get through, the, really harsh conditions. But now we live in a world where you don't need to kill animals at all, because we have all the research, all the science, all the nutritionists like Callum to allow us to see how we can live a healthy life that is ethical and, reduces as much suffering as possible. So it's like, even if he did give you dominion to eat animals, why give in to that temptation? Is it truly Christian to be eating meat if you don't need to eat it, right? And it could also just, be a test. So I think there's like every religion kind of like it gets mixed in with traditions almost, right? Especially with like religions like Islam, like it's like almost a tradition to consume lamb. But if we really backtrack to like the original saying and like the original word where it was interpreted 10, 20 centuries ago that we need to be consuming animals because it says it here, I think when you give room and opportunity to reinterpret what the Bible says, what the Quran says, what the, Bhagavad Gita says, you can kind of see it fit to have noble values in a way that shows, I think, just the basics, right? Healthy living, honest living, and being true to yourself and to people around you. And I think that was like the purpose of religions, but people, everyone has their own interpretations. Everyone has their own agendas. So there's so many ways you can look at it. But I think it's possible. Like if you know the material, it's possible to reinterpret it and allow someone to kind of re-examine their entire religion if they're open to it. So that's been my experience. But religion is a fun topic for me because it's just so like, I think it requires a lot of creativity to be able to like read the commandments, read the words, and try to really dissect what is being said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have like a slight argument towards it as well. And I think which what is more towards that. Obviously, you know, everything on our planet is, let's say, is there for us, and God's made it perfect for everybody. Then why is it that we are then, you know, mutilating and genetically breeding to make it better? Because whatever God gave us wasn't good enough. So we then play God itself, and then, you know, make it better, like make cows more plump, make chickens bigger because it wasn't good enough in the first place.
That's a good point. That is a good point. And I would take it even further and say, if it was created for us to consume, why is it giving us so many diseases? Why do we need to cook it, first of all? Like, why do we need to cook all the meat? Like, why are we being so picky with, all right, we got to consume this muscle, make sure it's cooked so all the bacteria die, and then season it and all this stuff? Like, if it was truly made for us to eat, like a real carnivore or like a real omnivore, we would be eating it raw. And secondly, why would God give them the ability to feel pain? You know, like, why is it so, like, why do we feel guilty showing kids how animals are being killed if it was completely natural for us and if it was completely what God intended us to do, right? Versus like when you're eating completely plant-based, you can freaking reverse diseases, you know? So it's like if you look at the actions and like the stories of people's lives based on their diet, I think the message, if you're like into spirituality, I think the message is pretty clear cut right there. You don't even need to read the book. You could just look at like what's happening. Like, what happens to you if you eat all animals? What happens to you if you eat all plants? How does your mental health change? How does your physical health change? And how does the world around you change? So I think that's like the common denominator that a lot of religions can look at and see like how you interact with God's creatures, right? With his plants and animals, and how that impacts you and the environment around you. Because if you truly cared about God and God's creatures, you would be respecting it a little bit more, even if it means going out of your way and going out of your comfort zone. I think that's like what a true angelic soldier would do in that type of biblical story.
Next, we have Jamie Logan, an astonishing activist who has mastered the art of blending humour with knowledge to spread awareness about some of the most pressing issues of our time. Jamie's energy is contagious, and her approach to activism is as thought-provoking as it is eye-opening. In our conversation, there were so many moments of pure brilliance, those sparks of passion and insight that make you stop and think. Honestly, narrowing it all down to one standout was nearly impossible. Even the trailers we put out caught a wave of attention, drawing in both praise and trolls alike. But that's the power of Jamie. She's a storm of inspiration, challenging the status quo in ways that demand you take notice. While we covered a lot in this chat, everything from PETA campaigns and leather alternatives to the bizarre reality of coconut monkeys and even being arrested in Grand Central Station, there's one topic we have to focus on today, and that's the fur industry. The fur industry, while slowly being scrutinized, it's still a hot topic as the world begins to take steps towards phasing out the use of animals as accessories. Jamie's insights on this are unflinching, and she breaks it all down with a mix of hard-hitting facts and her signature humour. Fur farming isn't about fashion. It's a mirror reflecting so many of the deeper issues we face as a society when it comes to how we treat animals. Let's dive into the powerful moment from Jamie Logan as she takes on the fur industry with the kind of fire and conviction that only she can bring. I think people don't realize that there's such a issue with fur, because people don't make the same connect as, you know, if they've made a connection with like meat and dairy, they have no real connection to the fur itself either. So what is wrong with fur farming?
Everything. Oh gosh, what kind of question is that? I mean, using animals in the first place is where the problem starts. In 2024, where we have so many alternative options, we should not be breeding, confining, killing, skinning animals for a fashion statement. I mean, the idea of literally taking a living being that has their own thoughts, emotions, desires, to kill them and turn them into something as vain as a jacket or a bag is absurd. And we should always be asking, if we would not want this done to ourselves or even to our dogs or our companion animals, then why is it okay to do it to any other animal? So fur farming specifically, I mean, besides the ethical dilemma here with the animal cruelty, it also is a really major problem when it comes to disease outbreak. I mean, during COVID, they had to cull and kill millions of minks because of the coronavirus, or there was some type of pandemic or
I remember
outbreak.
that happening. Yeah, that was awful.
Oh yeah, when you confine animals like that, you're looking to cause the next pandemic, basically. I mean, it is really absurd. And then not only that, but the environmental toll, the feces, the resources that it takes to feed these animals, to house these animals, it's massive. It's substantial, and we should be taking a look at what sustainable materials we can use instead. I know that there's plenty of vegan leathers and vegan furs and vegan wools that use recycled materials, or that use mushrooms or use bananas and all other sorts of materials that are better for the environment and that don't cause suffering, and also that are cute, that'll give you whatever sort of look you're going for. Yeah, it's really, it's a shame. It can take upwards of 60 animals to make a fur coat. And it's just, even if it's one animal making that coat, it's not okay. It's condemning another individual to a life of suffering and taking away their existence, their right to be here on planet Earth with us for a jacket that we don't need for survival anymore. So I also think people then, especially now, you're seeing an uproar of people being like, oh, well, vintage fur, vintage leather, vintage moles. It's like, get out of here. You're still walking around the street promoting violence, and nobody knows that your coat is vintage, first of all. Second of all, you can actually donate that fur back to the animals. Like, I truly come from a standpoint of like, it is so disrespectful to like walk around in their skins and their fur. It's like, even if it's secondhand, it doesn't make it all right, and it doesn't erase the violent history of that item. So I really do think that if you have vintage fur, you should look to donating it to sanctuaries or for places that will rehab the animals and that will use the fur to help sick and orphaned animals be rehabilitated. There's no need for us to be wearing that at all. It's disturbing. And it also goes to show our speciesism. As humans, we see some animals worth living, like our dogs and cats. People like whales and dolphins, turtles. But then when you look at other species like minks, when you look at species like salmon, like they automatically say, oh, well, they're not worth living. They're food, they're clothing, they're made for this, right? And it's like, well, actually, no. And if you wouldn't walk around in the furs from your dogs or from your cats, then you shouldn't walk around in the furs or skins of any other animal, because there simply is no difference that actually matters between those species.
While we're on the subject of fashion, it's the perfect time to bring in Jonathan O'Hyon. Jonathan is the founder of the Fake Movement, Fashion for Animal Kingdom and Environment. And in our conversation, we dive deep into the intersection of ethics, sustainability, and style. While fur was certainly part of the discussion, we turned a significant focus towards leather, a material many of us wear without truly understanding its impact. Leather isn't just an animal welfare issue, it's an environmental crisis and a human health disaster. The process of tanning leather is shockingly toxic, affecting not only those workers who handle it, but those of us who also wear it. A cocktail of chemicals is used to prevent leather from biodegrading, meaning it persists in the environment long after we use it. And then there's a surprising truth about genuine leather. Many of us assume it means leather from a cow, but as Jonathan explained, that's far from the full story. Leather can come from a range of animals, and often the origin isn't as transparent as you might think. Jonathan's work with the Fake Movement is all about creating awareness and advocating for a shift towards cruelty-free and sustainable fashion. His insights will make you think twice about what's in your closet and, more importantly, what we can do to push the industry forward for better practices. Let's listen to this eye-opening moment with Jonathan as he unpacks the truth about leather and why it's time to change the way we think about fashion.
So what is the issues with leather? Because leather is I feel like after reading there's so many issues with leather.
So do you have 4 hours? I can talk about hours about this. It's I believe my favorite topic. I actually even did a whole research. I conduct a whole research and study around leather because I never know where to start. But I think it all started when I saw dog leather because it's a thing that exists, dog leather, and mainly from countries where they actually eat dogs, which makes sense. They eat the dogs and they have left the skin, so they're gonna make product out of it. And then so basically how they do when they have this leather made out of dog, it's forbidden to ship it in many countries like Europe, USA. So how they do to ship those products in those countries? They're gonna create a product like gloves or very small like belt, gloves, shoes, pieces that you don't need a lot of leather, and they're gonna label this leather as genuine leather, which is true. It is genuine leather, and then they ship those products everywhere. So when someone buy a genuine leather made from China, Vietnam, I mean now there's more regulation, thank God, but back then you could easily buy a product genuine leather and it was dog leather. There was no way to know if it's true or not. So I started to make research about this, and again, I can talk about this for hours, but I realized that the problem is way bigger than this. That the chemicals we use in the leather, the fact that we never know where this leather come from, then we don't know how many chemicals there is because each tannery have their own recipe. So you have some tannery that will use 50 chemicals, and you have some that use 250 different chemicals. Some of the chemicals are very carcinogenic. You can find arsenic, chromium. You have like horrible chemicals, and most of people produce the leather overseas because there's not as many regulation. So then what they do with this water full of these chemicals, they just throw it in rivers where you have kids that are playing, they are fishing. It has an impact on their health. Those place, I'm thinking of this place mainly in India. There's many documentaries about it. If you put India leather, you will find a lot of documentary about it. And you see in those areas, they have the higher rate of asthma. You see their skin that is bleached, their hands are bleached, their shoes are, their foot are bleached because they don't have any protection. They are working without protection. They die at a very young age of asthma, of cancer, of horrible disease. So it has an impact of the human. It has an impact of the animal and on the environment, and then on ourselves, because then we put those products on us. And the same way you when you put a cream, you want to make sure there's no bad chemicals on it. But when you wear leather, it's the same. Leather is made to keep you warm. So because it's warm, it opens the pores, it makes you sweat, and those chemicals can go inside of your body. So people don't really make the connection, but yeah, leather is the worst. And before I get asked these questions, because I get it asked every time, the production of leather has 4 to 20 times worse impact on the environment than the production of plastic. So I say 4 to 20 because it depends on which type of plastic, which type of vegan leather. But yeah, the production of leather is way worse on the environment than the production of plastic. So yeah.
I think as well, like obviously people they will look at the back of a packaging of food, for instance, and like they get scared if they see there's more like than 20 ingredients, then they don't know what it is. But happily,
exactly,
like something that says, let's say genuine leather, but genuine leather doesn't have it doesn't have a list of ingredients that have been put into this. So I think do you think if people had like a list of ingredients that came with like let's say a leather jacket, that people would be a bit more cautious about what they're putting on? But so, as you said, there's so many different chemicals that you're sticking onto your body, and so many people are more cautious about what's that they're sticking on their face with cream. People are more cautious about what they're putting in their body with food. But when it comes to clothes, they're not really thinking too much about what they're putting on their body. They're just like, oh, it's a piece of clothing, but there's no ingredient list. It maybe says like 100% leather, or 100% cotton, but doesn't actually say what the process has gone through to create this piece of product.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like if you buy a piece of bread, you look at the ingredient and it say bread. That's the ingredient. So I want to believe that people, if they knew all those ingredients, they will actually stop. Uh, Unfortunately, you still have people buying food without really knowing what it is. People check the ingredient, it's a natural flavor. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it means, but we still eat that. So if we are ready to eat the thing, what else we are ready to do? So I really think it's more about education and really understanding the process and the impact of it. And then once we know it, we don't want to be a part of it. We don't want to buy a piece of leather when we know all the harms it can give, not only to the environment, but to humans, to literally to kids. So yeah.
I think as well what I've learned is, especially after reading this, is that leather is far from natural because everybody assumes it's just a natural byproduct.
Yeah.
However, it's so far from natural by the time it actually gets to what it is. If it was still natural, it'd still be like a hide, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, saying that leather is natural, it's like saying that plastic is a natural chemical reaction of petroleum and alcohol, which is true. It's plastic is natural. It's petroleum oil is natural. So it's kind of the same. And when we start saying that, we're like, oh yeah, actually it's true. It doesn't make sense to say that it's natural. What is natural is the skin of the animal, because if you throw it, it will naturally biodegrade. But we don't want a product to biodegrade, so we want to put all these chemicals that are made to bleach the color of the skin to make sure that it doesn't biodegrade anymore. Many people like to say, "Oh, leather is amazing because it's naturally biodegradable." So if it is, why it lasts for centuries? Leather is actually made not to biodegrade. We stop the process of biodegrading, so it's actually really bad for the environment. So yeah, it's far from natural.
Speaking of ingredients, this is the perfect time to bring in my great friend, Ollie Wetherill. Ollie is a passionate advocate for allergy awareness, and his insights come from a very personal place. Living with a multitude of allergies himself, he has first-hand experience navigating a world that many of us take for granted. Before meeting Ollie, I'll admit, allergies weren't something I thought much about. My focus was always ensuring no animal ingredients were present in my food. But for people with allergies, the challenge goes beyond that. The 14 major allergens are more than just a list. They're the bane of some people's lives, dictating every meal, every snack, every bite, and it doesn't just stop there. Ollie's work highlights the hidden dangers lurking in the supply chain. Where did the food come from? How was it processed? What cross-contamination might have occurred? These are questions that most of us rarely think about. But for someone with life-threatening allergies, that's a daily reality. And it's not just about managing known allergens. One of the most fascinating parts of our conversation was exploring why we're seeing more and more cases of adults developing allergies later on in life. How is it possible that people can suddenly react to foods they've been eating for decades? Ollie's advocacy is a powerful reminder of the complexities of our food system and the challenges faced by so many. Let's dive into this thought-provoking clip with Ollie Wetherill as he shares his perspective on living with allergies and what we all need to understand about the food we eat.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's just in partly ignorance and partly when you're younger, like child and teenager. If you stand out in any way, it's a very easy way to like pick on someone. So if you have allergies, particularly when I was a bit younger, it's unfortunately worse now in the fact that more children have allergies. So it's becoming more common, which isn't a good thing. But like, I didn't really know almost anyone really with when I had my diagnosis of my peanut allergy when I was 13 or so. I didn't really know anyone who sort of had allergies, in particular like severe allergies, and I still don't really now. It's going to be very different, unfortunately, for anyone who's 13 now who maybe gets diagnosed. There's a recent study come out in the UK, which I think implied that 1 in 6 children now have an allergy. So like it's a lot. And also they found the figures for adults are much higher than we like thought. So the sort of common wisdom, or whatever you'd call it, was that maybe 1 to 2% of the UK adult population have allergies. And like for someone like me, that probably felt about reasonable, just so I didn't know that many people with them. But recent figures imply that it's more like 5 to 6%. And there appears to be more and more people, adults, developing them later in life as like a trend. Like there's a particularly strange story that one of my friends' dads, who used to eat, I think, a pack of peanuts every night for his whole life, who's now, I don't know, like 60, whatever, something like that. And he's suddenly just developed a severe peanut allergy. And now we can't eat peanuts. And it's just absolutely bizarre. Like he used to eat them every day. And one day he's severely allergic. Like, and there does seem to be a bit of a trend of older and older people just suddenly developing allergies, particularly like in that case, the stuff they've eaten their whole life. And there's definitely an unfortunate trend in there being, it's just growing. It's just consistently the past few decades, it's just getting worse and worse, it appears, in how many people have them.
Is there any reason that we kind of know of, or that the science is saying, of why this is happening? Like, is it down to like, like gut microbes and stuff like that? Because with the way we eat as a population, I feel bad about lumping everybody in, but like if you take into consideration like the UK, the States, and like about Australia, these kind of like first world like countries, obviously a lot of the people aren't eating the healthiest of diets. That being said, there is quite a few that do eat healthy diets, but obviously we are affecting our like gut microbes, and I didn't know if that was, if anything, a reason why obviously these allergies are coming about, because we are playing and messing around by eating stuff that probably shouldn't be in our body in the first place.
So there is one of, it does appear, I checked a few days ago because I want to try and make sure I was actually up to date on what's being said, and it seems to be the same things that have been said for probably 5 to 10 years, that the jury, it seems to still be, the jury's still out on exactly, or so there's a few like hypotheses or like things we think are contributing, but knowing which to what extent each are like causative in it still doesn't seem to be completely clear. So one thing, as you said, does appear to be some form of gut link. So there's one hypothesis that you might have even heard of called the hygiene hypothesis, which basically, as children are growing up in like a cleaner world, which has its benefits, and there's less like certain diseases due to that, but they're not necessarily being exposed to microbes and things like that, which would challenge their immune system in like a positive way. And there's some, I think, epidemiological data which implies that on average, kids which grow up on like farms in more rural areas tend to have fewer allergies. So there does appear to be something in that. There's also another thing that's slightly linked to gut, which is increased antibiotic use. So in particular, early stage antibiotic use, which I fall into. So of like antibiotics under the age of 2 has been shown to like increase your likelihood of developing allergies. And I had a really big course of antibiotics when I was under 2, because I had like something wrong with my ear or something like that. And that does appear to change the microbiome. So that's definitely an element, I would say. And there's a few other bits as well. So there's something called the theory of dual allergen exposure, which is actually which I also had to a degree. So if people in their childhood have eczema, they can get sensitized to allergens in like a non-normal way. So the normal way of consuming food is through your mouth, goes through your gastrointestinal system. But if you have eczema and you have broken skin, the allergen can sort of seep through your skin and doesn't go through the normal process. And it appears that sensitizes, which isn't a good thing. And there used to be, when I was younger, peanut oil was used in like bath products and stuff like that. So if you had a bath with eczema, you're potentially sensitizing your skin, so that influences. One that's more recent, I think, I don't remember hearing quite as much about it when I looked, say, 5 years ago. So is there's maybe an association between the global vitamin D insufficiency and allergies, because basically vitamin D is needed for a healthy immune system. So I think they're sort of saying, well, if there's not enough, if you don't have enough vitamin D, is that predisposing you as well? And there's the other aspect, at least for in the UK, I don't quite know how wide this advice was, which unfortunately I was also implicated in, was, so when I was younger, I had an egg allergy. And at that point, the advice was for me to avoid peanuts because there was a chance I was going to be allergic to them. So I said, well, avoid them. And what basically we know now is that's not the right thing, because then I didn't build up a sensitivity and it probably actually increased my chance of developing it. So I think part of the increase might be a knock-on effect of the like medical advice given to however many people it's given to for however long, which now they wouldn't be giving to people. So yeah, there's quite a lot of potential things, and I think, at least for me, like I had a few of the predisposing factors, like early use antibiotics. I'm not quite sure if there's a genetic link. I forgot to check this, but I think there might be, like my mum has asthma and allergies to certain animals, so maybe that plays a part. And then I had this advice which you wouldn't be giving now. So like, yeah, didn't have a huge chance necessarily.
So when it does come to allergies, obviously, do you still have an egg allergy?
There's a few allergens which you're more likely to grow out of if you have them as a child. So particularly egg and milk. I think people often outgrow them. I don't quite know if there's others that are sort of in that category. But yeah, I outgrew that by maybe when I was like 12 or something like that. So I sort of grew out of that, and there's stages of how you build up your tolerance to that. You have things like baked egg in cakes, and you sort of grade up, because I think if it's baked, it's less allergenic or stuff like that. So I grew out of that. And then I supposedly had a year when I didn't have allergies, but like looking back, I was actually reacting to peanuts when I was younger, and I didn't really put two and two together. And unfortunately, the reactions have been getting worse and worse and worse each time. So they used to be like milder, where I just have like gastrointestinal issues and being like sick, and then it sort of progressed to worse and more like scary things as the years have sort of gone by, which is another aspect of allergies, which isn't always the case, but reactions can be very different from time to time. So when I found out that I had a peanut allergy, I reacted with lots of hives all over my body. My sort of throat was slightly restricted and got really like thick saliva and stuff like that. And since then, when I've had other reactions, I've never had the hives, but I've had more worrying ones where you feel like faint, which is a drop of blood pressure. So it's the other thing that people with allergies have to have in the back of their mind, that they have no idea whether it's going to be worse, it's going to have like this, it's going to be the same or different. And it's another thing that I think in the back of certain people's minds, if they're not deemed that their allergy is severe enough to be given EpiPens, their next reaction could actually be worse than their last one. So like it's another like dynamic, and unfortunately the trend of mine have been getting worse each time. So there's sort of that thing in the back of my mind thinking, how much worse can they get before it gets like really like serious? And yeah, you're thinking like worst case scenario, which is another nice thing to have in the back of your head.
Now let's take a bit of a swerve off topic and dive into the incredible story of Renee King-Sonnen from Rowdy Girl Sanctuary. I simply couldn't leave Renee out of this episode because her journey left such a profound impact on so many of you. After her episode aired, my inbox was flooded with comments and questions, with listeners sharing how her story had completely shifted that perspective. If you haven't, I highly recommend you go revisit that episode to learn more about how you can support Rowdy Girl Sanctuary. It's truly a cause worth standing behind. But today, let's talk about what sparked that transformation. Renee takes us through that pivotal moment, what turned her world upside down. It wasn't just a lifestyle change, it was a complete upheaval. A shift that saw her and her husband turning their cattle ranch, once a place where animals were raised for slaughter, into a thriving animal sanctuary. This story is about more than just compassion. It's about resilience, growth, and the courage to question deeply ingrained beliefs and systems. Renee's journey is a testament to how life-altering a shift in perspective can be. Not just for her and her family, but for countless animals and people who've been inspired by her story. Let's dive into this powerful moment with Renee King-Sonnen as she recounts the last straw that set everything into motion, creating Rowdy Girl Sanctuary.
We sent the last of the cows to the sale barn in February of 2014. We didn't know that was going to be the end. That's the time that Lucky jumped out and almost broke his leg. Was in February, and that is actually Rowdy Girl's firstborn son. And so, from February to October is when all our fights escalated, and I didn't know that I was going to be vegan the following year. I had no idea. I had no idea that our days were numbered as a cattle rancher. But month by month, the tension mounted. And I told Tommy, I started watching more and more of those slaughterhouse videos. I was watching them every day, Callum. I was crying, screaming every day. I was losing my mind on a daily basis from what I was figuring out and finding and discovering about what we were doing. And Tommy couldn't handle me. I mean, because the way our house was at the time, there was a cutout between the living room and my office where I had where I was watching all those videos, and he was in the other room watching the news. He would turn the news up really loud to try to drown out me with all that slaughterhouse going on and me screaming and crying. And so if you can imagine the tension, and he would scream at me to stop that. He'd come in there and say, Renee, quit watching. What are you doing? I said, this is what we're doing. These animals go here. And I'm not a vegan. I'm having an awakening on a freaking cattle ranch. Didn't even know it. I thought I was going batshit crazy. And I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. And then on Halloween Day, we were getting ready to go to my mother-in-law's house for our we had a yearly thing with them. We'd go to the block party. All the kids would go in their costumes. And there was always, a little parade down there, on the block, and all the kids would come and get candy. And all the adults would sit out there and, have a beer or whatever they do. And, the kids, and there was always food. Well, I'm watching more videos, and then I stumble upon, and it's Halloween. And then I stumble upon Melanie Joy. You know her?
I know Melanie Joy. Yeah.
So I know her very good now, very well. She and I are actually friends. But Dr. Melanie Joy came on, and it was all about why we eat pigs, wear cows, and love dogs, or something like that. And it was on carnism, and there was a family eating beef stew, and the family was eating beef stew around the table, and everybody's enjoying it so much. Oh, this tastes so good. And somebody said, what is this recipe? And the lady of the house says, oh, I'm so glad you asked. You start off with a pound of very young golden retriever. And you know this story?
Yeah, I know the story, yeah.
And anyway, that was the first time I'd heard it. And I was like, oh my God. And I did just like that. And so did everybody else on the camera. They were like, oh my God, I can't eat that. And I was with them. And then she was like, no, never, just kidding. It's really a cow. And nobody could keep eating because their consciousness for that split second got hijacked by the notion that they were eating a baby golden retriever. And Tommy comes in about that time and says, Renee, we got to go. You got to go put your makeup on or something. You look terrible. And because I've been crying. And so I went and got dressed and we left. And we go to my mother-in-law's Halloween night. We walk in her house, all the kids, all the in-laws, all the outlaws, all the costumes, all this stuff. And my mother-in-law comes out with a pot of beef stew. And it was like slow motion for me. Okay. And it was like, she comes out, Renee, would you like both? And that's the way it was for me. I was like, oh my God, you can't make this up. I'm in the script. It just happened. I just watched this. And I was like, no, I can't eat that. Just like they did, on the film. And she was like, why not, Renee? And all the kids, all the commotion, everything's going. And I said, because it's got floating dead, hacked up animal bodies in it, and I can't eat it. And oh my God, everybody got quiet. Everybody looked at me. And my mother-in-law was like, what did you say? I repeated it in the silence. It's got floating dead, hacked up animal bodies in it. I ain't eating it. I'm done. And she was like, well, Renee, you can pick it out. And I was like, nope. There ain't no more picking it out for me. My husband was looking at me like, oh my God. I mean, his mama's name was Effie. She was like the southern matriarch of the family. You didn't tell her you weren't going to eat her beef stew. You certainly wasn't going to tell her it was like floating dead, hacked up animal bodies in it. And I did that. They already thought I was crazy because he divorced me once already. And now here I am. Here I am. Anyway, if you can only imagine. And so anyway, Tommy and I went home directly after that. And man, it was Katie bar the door. I had slid down that rabbit hole. I had gone vegan on the spot. I didn't know I was going vegan that day. All I knew is that was over, and I got on my computer because I remembered in looking at all those slaughterhouse videos, stumbling on a bit of vegan stuff, but I didn't pay no mind. I'm not going to go vegan, but I remembered stumbling on some of this stuff, and I went, oh my God, I've gone vegan. I'm a vegan. Oh my God. And so I start looking for friends on Facebook, people on Facebook that are vegan. And I stumbled upon a vegan registry, a global vegan registry. I found a friend. Her name was Jeannie. She's my friend to this day. She was like 18 years vegan. And yeah, that's where my journey as a vegan began.
Speaking of sanctuaries, let's talk about Susan Joyce, affectionately known as Pigeon Sue, and her incredible work at Little Green Pigeon Sanctuary. Another one that you can go check the episodes out to find out how you can support Sue and the sanctuary. This unique sanctuary is a haven for pigeons, offering them a safe space far removed from the dangers of pigeon racing, life on the streets, and other threats they face. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. A sanctuary for pigeons. Aren't they just those dirty street birds we see every day? That's exactly the kind of misconception Sue is working to break. Pigeons are so much more than their reputation as mischievous city dwellers, and Sue's passion for these misunderstood birds is absolutely infectious. It's no wonder she became a fan favourite after the episode aired. Her sense of humour, no-nonsense attitude, and unmistakable British wit made for a memorable and impactful conversation. But beyond the laughs, Sue shared some fascinating insights that really hit home for me, and clearly for many of you as well. In particular, this clip, Sue dives into the origins of why pigeons are so widespread in the first place, and unpacks the often overlooked world of pigeon racing as a sport. It's a fascinating look at the history, the industry, and why these birds deserve far more care and respect than they often receive. Let's hear from Susan Joyce herself as she shares the eye-opening perspective on the birds we so often overlook.
we took a rock dove, which is a native bird, to I don't know which country in the world. You know, my geography is appalling. There was the original like jungle fowl, if you like, and we sort of mishmashed them like we always do with animals, and created what you kind of basically know now as a modern day feral pigeon. They haven't really changed apparently that much, because we realised that actually they were pretty easy to breed, and we can eat them. So they were basically the old fashioned chicken before modern day chickens came around. That's what we were eating. So we were eating their eggs and we were eating them as meat because they're really quite easy to breed, because they pair up for life, and they'll just produce egg after egg after egg. So they'll produce 2 eggs per brood, and they'll produce about 6 broods a year if you let them, which is why we don't like ours breed as well, which is why we swap our eggs out. Otherwise we'd have millions of pigeons by now. And the meat that people tend to eat is squab, which is baby pigeon. I don't know what age they eat them, but I'm guessing it's like 5 or 6 weeks old. Apparently that's when the meat's tender. So so people and they still do. It's not even a delicacy. It's still like a meat that's eaten in a lot of places, and in Britain. I don't know about Oz, but yeah, they eat pigeon still occasionally. But in America, they still eat quite a lot of squab apparently, and they're king pigeons, so they're slightly bigger, a bit like we've done with chickens. We've basically bred different varieties, and they've now got these really quite big white pigeons called king pigeons, and that's what they breed for meat. So that's how it all started. So of course they are completely domestic. They are domestic animals. They're not wild. And then they kind of fell out of favour with us, and we decided that actually there are other meats that we could eat instead, like chicken, and we just abandoned them basically. We just sort of went, well, we don't want these anymore, but they're all already millions and millions and millions and millions of them, and we just stopped feeding them and abandoned them. But they're domestic, so it's the same as breeding a puppy or a batch of puppies and just letting them out in the street and going, oh yeah, you can survive out there. Now look, it's like, you know, but unlike puppies, pigeons can survive because they're absolutely incredible birds. So they just learned to eat our scraps, eat our rubbish, basically. You know, in the same way that rats eat our rubbish, and that's why they get that reputation for being dirty and they get vilified, is because they are clearing. But they're clearing up after us. They're clearing up after people. There would be so much rubbish on the ground, like food waste, if it wasn't for rats and pigeons. But they get the rats for being dirty, not the pigeons. So that's not us. So that's where pigeons come from. But also, they come from the racing industry. So again, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we realised that we can use them as messengers. And we can use them to take messages back and forwards, but we can also bet on them and send them out for races, which is a whole other thing that we can talk about. But it's a blood sport. It's really, really cruel. And of course, all of this is exploitation, isn't it? So, but that's how they've ended up on the streets. So a lot of the birds that we find are ex-racers, and they may have been integrated into a flock for years, and then they get injured and they come into us, or they may come down in their first race, and that's why they end up on the streets. Because there's no natural food or water for them, and they are pets. Basically, they're domestic, so they get sent out in these huge races. They don't know how to get they know how to get back sometimes, but they get blown off course, or they're starving. So they come down, they see a flock, they come down, and then they just stay there for a couple of days. And the lucky ones are the ones that don't go back, basically, because if they're a couple of days late and then they go back. Not all pigeon races are like this, but the majority that I've come across, which you always do because we've got a legal obligation, the birds don't belong to us. We phone the owners because of the ring on the leg, and they'll say, oh, we don't want them back. They're worthless now because they haven't won the race. Very occasionally, an owner will come and collect, and then obviously it's the worry of what they're actually going to do to that bird. So I'll only release them if I'm really, really happy that they genuinely love the birds. So yeah, that's why there are so many pigeons on the streets. They shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there.
Which is really bizarre, because obviously, I've grown up thinking, just pigeons. They're just naturally everywhere. I didn't realise there was a whole backstory to the fact that we had them for so long, found them then slightly pointless by the end, and was just like, you know what? There you go, to the street, and then they've kind of. I'm guessing they trust us still very much. So.
Yeah.
Like London, they trust to go near you enough to get food off you. I don't know if that's because
it's a little bit of trust, but it's mostly just that there is no other food. There's no natural food source for it. So in and I can only talk about the UK, as we proved earlier when we were talking about where places are. And my geography is shit. I've never left the UK. I've never had a passport, and my life experience is just the UK. But so I can only talk about that. But in the UK, there are only three types of pigeon. So there's a wood pigeon, which are the big, like, they're the ones that sing, "They're my shoes, Betty. They're my shoes, Betty." That's a wood pigeon. Great big girl. She's amazing. Quite clumsy because they're really big birds. They sit on your fence. They fall off when they're shagging. They're really clumsy big birds, but they're amazing. They're really clumsy birds, and they'll be the ones that are fighting. They're going to be the big in the UK. They're going to actually be, other than if you're lucky enough to get a bird of prey in your garden, they are going to be the biggest bird that you get in your garden, unless you get seagulls, obviously, because seagulls are whoppers. But for garden birds, the wood pigeon is going to be the biggest bird in your garden. They're beautiful birds. They've got big bands of purple and green and a big white collar. They're absolutely, and huge grey birds. They are gorgeous. There is loads of natural food, and they are our native pigeon. They eat different types of grasses and clovers and seeds and legumes. They'll eat insects if they need to. They're absolutely incredible. So that's wood pigeons. The other type of pigeon, which there are squillions of around here, is Eurasian collared doves, which are adorable, and they're these tiny sort of beigey, peachy little guys like this with a black band around their necks, and they love the sound of their own voice. So they will go up on a chimney and sort of go down the chimney and go, woo, woo, down your chimney. I've got friends who've got rescue collared doves, and they will walk round looking for something to stick their heads in, like a glass or a cup. And if they can find something, they'll stick their head in and go, woo, just because they love the sound. I love collared doves. And they look really cute and really tiny and almost like Disney kind of caricature, and they are so aggressive. They're so aggressive. They will fight like to the death with other collared doves. They're quite territorial, and when we have them in, they hate being in captivity. They're proper wild, and they're really aggressive. So those are the two kind of properly wild pigeons. All the rest of the pigeons in the UK are domestic. They shouldn't be here. So if I woke up tomorrow, if I went out there now and there were no pigeons, I would be, no feral pigeons, I'd be so happy. And I think it's assumed, I think, we've kind of had this conversation before about veganism, where people assume that vegans want to wake up and see millions of cows in a field and millions of... No, we don't want to see any of them. We don't want them to exist because they're being bred by us. And it's kind of... So it's slightly different to that with feral pigeons now, because it's been thousands of years that they have been domesticated and then left. They are now breeding on their own, of course, which is why there are so many. But their numbers are being added to on a daily basis by show birds that get lost or are abandoned, show pigeons, fancy pigeons, or by these racers that come down in racing, in races and then end up in the flock looking for food, because going back to what we were saying, there's no natural food. So there's natural food for Eurasian collared doves, there's natural food in the wild for wood pigeons, but there isn't for ferals. They eat a slightly different diet. They don't really want to eat insects. They're seed eaters, and they don't know where to get their food from. So that's why there are so many, and that's why it's abhorrent, really, the way that they're treated. It's dreadful. Apparently there was a pigeon in China about 3 months ago that sold £1.2 million for one pigeon.
That much? That's an insane amount for a pigeon.
Yeah, it's because we exploit them so much. We exploit we can talk about pigeon racing if you like, which is horrendous, but that's the reason, is because people bet money on them. It's the same as horse racing, and I feel like we're making little gains maybe in horse racing, but realistically, we're never going to stop it because there's too much money involved, and it's exactly the same. And I think certainly in this country, people think that pigeon racing is like an old man sport. That's the comment that I get all the time is, pigeon racing is an old man sport. It's like, no, it's not. Funny enough, yesterday, I haven't had a chance to read this yet, somebody sent me an article that was in The Guardian about it yesterday, saying, the new breed of pigeon racers, and it was all these kids racing pigeons, and it's just like, oh, guys, come on. Why? We're so much better than this. Why are we doing this? So while that is still being done, we're never going to stop it.
I feel like that can't be a fun sport to watch, but you see them take off. What are you doing in that time? It's not like if you were to watch like a sport like football, or rugby, you're watching it the whole entire time. You're letting the pigeon go, and it might not come back.
No,
it's not exciting.
I'm laughing because I've never actually thought about that bit. Where there's just some woman stood there going, I wonder when they're coming back.
That's literally it.
They do. I feel like I need to ask that question now. Next time I come across a pigeon race, instead of having a go at them, I might be like, look, what you do is abhorrent and we want to talk about this, but can I just ask you, what do you do in those 4 hours when you're waiting for...
Yeah, like what's the excitement about? Like I can understand like the horse racing and the dog racing because people are watching that go round.
Okay.
Like But
Yeah.
however, like with pigeons, like if that flies away, that like you're not. What are you watching? You're watching the air.
Oh god. So yeah. So in a okay. So in a in a local race. So let's say I had a flock of pigeons here, and I was going to let them out to race. In local races, it's not always for money. Sometimes it is just for the love of the bird. I still don't agree with it, but that's why they do it. So in a local race, I might literally put 3 of my birds in my car and drive for an hour down the road. That would be fairly local. By the time I've got home, the pigeons are probably already home.
That's wild.
They are that fast. So they can fly at about 90 miles an hour.
That's some speed.
Yeah, they're going to get home before you, basically. So yeah, there's no time to Netflix and chill or do anything like that. They are literally they're literally going to be home before you in a local race. So like, yeah, there's no time to even cook your potatoes. They are just going to be home before you. So they wear little banded rings with like a magnet on, and that clocks the time that they come in, so they know who's won the race. So that's how that works. In a longer race, the reason that they would be away for days, so then it was just a case of again waiting for the tags to go off when they come home. So with the longer pigeon racing, what they do, are you ready for this? Because this is horrendous. This is what they actually do. It's called widowing. So pigeons breed for life. They mate for life. Technically, some of them don't. Some of them do have lots of different partners because they're little slags. But the majority of them mate for life, right? So Freddie and Wilma mate for life, and then they're all really happy and they're properly in love. Pigeons are like properly in love. They kiss and they transfer pigeon milk, which is basically vomit, into each other's mouths because that's what they do, and it's delicious. And they have a little snog, and then they have a little mate, and then they'll produce 2 eggs. And so what the pigeon racers do is the humans involved is they will either wait until they've been sat on the eggs for quite a while, or they will wait until those eggs are hatching, and they will take away one of the birds, whichever's the best racer, and they will put them in a box with other birds, and they will drive that bird, I don't know, 300 miles away, maybe over the seas, to Belgium or to France or somewhere like that. And then they will release that bird 3 days later. So that bird has been in a box. They haven't been able to move. They have no food, no water. If it's warm, they're in a warm box for 3 days on a lorry, because they're going with these big races. You're talking about thousands of birds in a huge HGV lorry, basically a massive lorry. They get taken away and then they get let out. The time that they leave is logged. They let all the birds out. Now that bird is going to fly home, and this is why it's called widowing, because the only thing that bird can think about the whole time it's in that box and the whole time it's flying home, the only thing that bird is thinking about is getting home to their partner and their babies. That's it.
That's fucked.
Yeah, it is fucked. It's absolutely horrendous. So what we're doing, we're exploiting the fact that they can fly, but what we're actually doing is exploiting their mental health. We're exploiting the fact they love their partners so much, because they absolutely that's all they can think about is getting home. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous.
When you take them that far away, let's say you take them to Belgium, how, like, I'm guessing they have quite a good navigation system to work their way back.
Yeah, we don't know how they do it. We still don't know. And there is a little bit of quite gentle research being done to work out how that is, but we don't know. They're incredible. But what we do know is that nowadays they follow there's this test where they put cameras on them. And they don't take them thousands of miles, because we're trying to be kind to these birds when we're learning about them, because it's generally people who really love them. So they put these little trackers on and these cameras on, and they watch where they're going, like a GoPro thing, and they watch where they're going. So obviously, a couple of 100 years ago, they would have just flown straight across fields, and we don't know whether it's a magnetic thing or what, but they can get back home. But what they've found that they do now is they follow the roads. So they tend to drive along like the M6 if they're going that way, and then they'll turn off when they come to a traffic island. They'll be like, "Oh right, I've got to turn right here." So they're probably doing more miles than they need because they're following. They're amazing. We don't know why. Absolutely, we don't know why they do it. They are incredible birds. They're absolutely incredible. So yeah, take away the exploitation. They're absolutely amazing. So the other part of it, why it's so cruel as well, is pigeons generally walk for their food. They don't need to naturally fly for their food. So if we go back to talking about Eurasian collared doves and wood pigeons and the original jungle fowl that turn into the feral birds, they don't fly hundreds of miles for food. That's not in their nature. They're fairly territorial. Not that a feral pigeon will fight for territory as such, but they will stick in their own groups. So as an example of that, the flock in Aberaeron, which is where I am, and there's a flock in Aberystwyth, which is 45 minutes up the road, because that's how far away towns are here, because I live in Wales and everything's miles away. Those two flocks will never integrate. You will not get a bird from Aberaeron will not go, oh, do you know what? I fancy going on holiday. I'm going to fuck off to Aberystwyth and just fly. They won't do it, because they've got food where they are, their friends are where they are, their girlfriends are where they are. Then they don't need to fly away. So they will fly for maybe 10 minutes a day. The rest of the time they're walking around, which is why we love them, because they're sort of always walking around like this. They're walking around looking for food. They don't naturally fly for that long. So that's the other reason why these races are just so barbaric, because you're asking a bird that has got incredible flight muscles. Don't get me wrong, the muscles here on a pigeon are absolutely incredible, but they don't need to fly that long, and they don't as a naturally fly for that long. So you're taking a bird hundreds of miles away and getting it to fly back just for your own gain, for money, and for the prestige of having a winning bird. And so you're exploiting them like twofold, really. You're exploiting the nature that they want to come home to the family, and you're exploiting the fact that they can fly because they don't need to fly, and they don't fly for food. So of course they would, if there was no food, like a wood pigeon, of course, will fly to a field if it wants to, she wants to get some food from a crop or something, then of course she will. But you're talking about 10 minutes of flight, not 9-10 hours.
As we start to bring this episode to a close, there's no better way to round things off than with Ella Majors. Ella is one of those rare people you can't help but love. She's fun, compassionate, and deeply genuine. A beautiful soul who embodies what it means to lead with kindness and authenticity. Her episode was one that left a lasting impression on so many of you, and I'll admit it took me some time to narrow down the best moments to share here. Ella's insights, humour, and warmth make every part of our conversation so memorable. But as we wrap up this journey, I wanted to end with something that felt universal, something that ties into the core of what this podcast is all about: love, connection, and self-acceptance. So I turn to you, my listeners, and you brought the questions for Ella. One question in particular that stood out is, what does sexy mean to you? What does it mean to feel sexy? Ella's response was nothing short of perfection. She articulated the idea with such clarity, vulnerability, and wisdom that I couldn't imagine a better way to close off this episode. So let's hear it from Ella Majors herself, as she reminds us all what it means to truly feel love for ourselves, for others, and the world around us. So 3 days ago, I put on one of my stories if there was any questions for you.
Oh.
And I've got two that really stuck out to me.
Okay.
For you. And the first one that came along was, what does sexy mean to you?
Oh.
I feel like,
Loved it.
so when I actually went back and asked that person, what do you mean by that? And it was very much, obviously, the definition of sexy in most people's minds is somebody, just very attractive. Whereas I feel like that person's version of sexy was how they felt inside.
This is such a great question. I love it. And I actually have an acronym, what sexy means. The S is soul aligned. I talk a lot about alignment and really aligning our actions with what our true values are and what our true person is. So soul aligned, embracing your body. That's having a healthy relationship with your body. And again, aligning your actions with a healthy body. Exploring life playfully is the X. A little bit cheating there. It starts with an E, but X is tough. And what I mean by exploring life playfully, it was 1 year, several years ago. Every year I have a word that I kind of use as a word or phrase that I use as my mantra for the whole year. Try to work on something about myself. And 1 year I just had been feeling a lot of anxiety. And so I decided my phrase for that year was play life like a game. And that was one of the most transformative years of my life, to see life as an adventure, to see life as a game, to understand that we have the power over, our thoughts. We have the power over what we choose to do. And it's like kind of like going through this game of, okay, here's my next move, right? And then how that moves, then I'm going to have so many choices based on that move. And you're kind of going through the game board and having a little separation of seeing yourself as this kind of actor in this game. And yeah, that was a transformative year. So exploring life playfully and you being you. So it's just about embracing yourself, accepting and loving yourself exactly as you are, as a prerequisite for transformation, that authenticity piece. So yeah, that's what sexy means to me. It has nothing to do with what we look on the outside. I think compassion is incredibly sexy. Have you ever seen the memes of? They're usually of men. It's something about like a vegan man, and for me, I'm like that is so sexy. A man who's compassionate, who's connected to that. And who is choosing to live in alignment with that, like that is sexy to me.
I love that. The other actually there was two more. One was that I'm looking for motivation, but I don't know how to get motivation. And yeah, I feel like that is a hard one. I feel like it's very much putting action first, but I think
you called it. Yeah, you called it. I think it's first just shifting your mindset around motivation. We think we have to feel motivated in order to get into action, when really the motivation follows action. So if we can remind ourselves, motivation follows action. What are an intentional action I can take that's aligned with my values, that's aligned with my health and fitness goals, and then just do it. You got to just do it. You got to say, here's what's in alignment, and I'm going to do it. And know that if you can do that temporarily, you can will through it temporarily, the motivation will follow. And, there's not a whole lot of easy things except coaching yourself. And I talk about pausing. So pausing, we call it the power pause. Before you take an action or decide not to take an action, you pause, you process your thoughts and your emotions. You think about what's driving you to do or not do right now. Is that a self-sabotaging thought? Or is it a healthy thought? If it's a self-sabotaging thought, what's a new thought that I can create right now? Again, it's coming up with your why, reminding yourself of your deeper, more meaningful why. And then what action do I need to take to be in alignment with that thought, that empowering thought? And then you got to just do it. Motivation will come.
I think that's the perfect answer to that. That was beautifully put. And the last one was from here it is, I've got it here, is would you say that you're spiritual? And if so, like how and why?
Yes, I'm very spiritual. I think I always have been, but I didn't really think of myself as such. Because for me, spirituality is all about connection and love and compassion. And if love is at the base of all that, the only reason to be compassionate to everyone around you is that if you feel connection to them. And I feel so connected to all beings on earth, even people that are, hateful. If I can meet that with love, that's the best chance we have to make this planet a better place. And it's hard. It's not easy. But I feel strongly enough that that's my job. My job is to approach everything and everybody with love. And it's that love and I believe in, that being a frequency that we can start to raise the frequency on the planet. And it's tough when there's such division. It's tough, but we can either be part of the problem, part of the hate, or we can be the opposite of that. And I'm going to choose the opposite, and just making that choice feels so good, and I know it spreads. So yeah, that's my spiritual. I don't know what happens when we die, but I have pets, animal communicators that help communicate with my loved ones that have crossed. And I believe that there's that consciousness, that spirit in us absolutely continues on, that we're all ultimately one. And so by hating somebody else, I'm hating myself. And so I choose love.
Thank you all for sticking around. It truly means the world to me. Your unwavering support, your kind messages, your listens, your shares, it's all been nothing short of incredible. And I couldn't do this without you. And knowing you're there every step of the way has been my greatest motivation. Of course, I wish I could have included everybody in this episode, but unless you wanted a 5-hour marathon, it just wasn't possible. That being said, I do want to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to all the incredible guests who graced this podcast with their time, stories, and insights. To Mark Pages, Najib Dubaisi, Greg Roseboom, Rebecca Gadsawicki, Sandra Namoto, Sarah Kabacho, Leonore Ray Ortega, Corinne Sutton, Tina Newman, Kaylee Goodman, Soraya Pinder, Tui Van Rentegam, Ellie Busby, Samantha Hadlington, Annette Henry, and Lucas Vasily. You've not only enriched this podcast, but also inspired me and so many of our listeners, so thank you for everything you've shared. As we wrap up, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for those who have been here from the start. Thank you all for sticking with me through every twist and turn. And for those who have just joined us on this journey, welcome. It's only going to get better from here. Next year is already shaping up to be something special. I've got episodes recorded, a lineup of guests you've been asking for, and conversations that dive even deeper into those big questions you've been seeking answers to. I won't spoil the surprises, but trust me, the best is yet to come. Until then, thank you for being part of this community. Have an incredible end of the year. And I'll see you beautiful people in 2025. Peace and plants.